Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It's October 30th, 2020, and we are just a few days away from the general election in the United States. November 3rd will be the election. Many feel it's a super important election, and this is probably the most divisive election that I've ever seen as a 51-year-old U.S. citizen. And of course, as always, there are some fun and interesting religious themes that go along with this election. And so I thought I would do something that some people think is crazy, that other people really like. I think we had a really productive session just a few hours ago. But what I decided to do on Mormon Stories Podcast was to feature voters from both major candidates in the U.S. political system. We just spent 3 hours with voters or supporters for Donald Trump. And most of them were post-Mormons. We did have at least one active believing Mormon. And so we gave Donald Trump a good 3 hours. And now we're doing the other side. We are now going to be interviewing supporters of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And I'm really excited about this series. I want to give some disclaimers, just like I did at the beginning of the last episode, just so that everyone knows kind of where I stand and where I don't stand. I am nonpartisan in the sense that I think both parties have good things, both parties have bad things. I don't think there's one true party. I grew up very conservative, voted for Republicans my first few times voting, loved Rush Limbaugh as I was at BYU, majored in political science. I did a Capitol Hill internship in Washington, D.C. for a Republican congressman. While I was there, I got really disenchanted and disillusioned by the political corruption that I was seeing in D.C. So I jumped out of my ambitions. I threw away my ambitions to be a politician. And as I graduated from BYU and started becoming sensitive to issues like homophobia and sexism and racism more and more, my politics definitely shifted more to the left. I became a little bit left of moderate for many, many years. Also, one of the big issues for me was just hating war. I saw I believe war personally, war is one of the most immoral things there is. And so I've kind of been on the right and I've been on the left. I'm currently a registered Republican in Utah. I primarily did that to vote for John Huntsman in the primaries for his candidacy as governor. But I'm just going to admit, I am a Biden supporter. I voted for Joe Biden. And I should say that with an asterisk, because even though I voted for Joe Biden and largely because I have deep concerns about Donald Trump, and I was honest with my panel last session about my concerns with Donald Trump. I do not feel like Joseph Biden was in any stretch our best candidate. He was probably 5th or 6th or 7th on my list. I would have loved to see a woman president. I loved Klobuchar. I loved Elizabeth Warren. I'm really impressed with Kamala. But having said that, I do think Joe, there's a lot I like about Joe. And so what I'm trying to say is I'm not a partisan politically. I don't worship either candidate. I was going to say I don't demonize either candidate, but the truth is I'm really concerned about Donald Trump. But I'm going to try and be as moderate as I can in this panel about that. And just like I asked the Trump supporters a lot of hard questions about Trump, I hope to ask tough questions of Biden supporters about Biden. I'm going to invite listeners to share their tough questions for Biden supporters, because I really do want to incorporate comments and questions from our live YouTube audience, which I want to welcome, and our live Facebook audience, which I want to welcome as well. I also want to say, just a personal editorial opinion, that I believe that politicians often use social issues as a way to mobilize, but also sometimes distract voters from other influences and powers and issues that are oftentimes more important in terms of actually being relevant. And so in some sense, I have distaste and distrust of all political parties. I very much wish there was a viable third or fourth party sometimes in the United States. And sometimes I'm super disappointed by all candidates in all parties, which I'm sure our panelists today may appreciate. And the final thing I'm going to say is, do not come to Mormon Stories to get your political information. None of us are. I'm not super informed. Our panelists last session were not super informed. I love our panelists today, and I think many of them are super informed. But the purpose of today is not to provide evidence for your vote. Go get that from reputable sources, journalistic sources, information sources. I believe, as Jonathan Haidt teaches, that most people make their religious and political decisions originally based on emotion. And then oftentimes they use their logic or their reason or evidence to bolster or justify the decisions that primarily they arrived at emotionally. Now, my panel may be angry with me or may disagree with me about that, and I welcome you to disagree with me. But today, the purpose is not to establish truth, to indoctrinate anyone. I simply wanted to invite Biden and Harris supporters to share their experiences, their feelings, their perspectives on why they have made the choices that they did. And so that's the main choice. It's sort of like a podcast of record in 2020. Why did certain Mormons and Post-Mormons vote the way that they voted? I'm going to do my best to guide this discussion, ask fair questions. And I tried in both panels to get more diversity in the panels. I failed miserably in the last session. We did have two, for those who didn't listen and didn't want to listen to the last episode, we did have two members of the LGBTQ community who were Trump voters, but we did not have any people of color, and we only had one woman, and I'm super disappointed about that. Part of that is just Mormon and post-Mormon demographics. Part of that might be Trump demographics in terms of like who is a follower of Mormon Stories. But I'm super happy that today we have a more diverse representation for this episode. And so without any further ado, I'm going to welcome my awesome, amazing panel of Biden and Harris supporters. And what I'm going to do is just kind of go around the horn, and I'm going to ask each person first to just introduce themselves briefly, tell us some of their basic demographic information, and if they're comfortable sharing their relationship with the LDS Church, that's great too. And so let's begin. Kim, I'm going to start with a woman, if that's okay in this session. Kim, tell us a little bit about yourself, and welcome to Mormon Stories. And I'm going to unmute you, Kim. Just one second. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
You're ready. You're live.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Kim. I am currently in East Texas. I am also I'm still a member of the church, but I consider myself an ex-Mormon. I am also an ex-BYU student, and right now I'm currently a social work student at the University of Houston downtown. And I should graduate with my master's by, I think, summer of 2023. With my social work degree, I hope to go into either medical social work or crisis intervention. And I recently joined in the advocacy field by speaking at the latest Texas Behavioral Health Executive Commission meeting on behalf of my disabled son against Governor Abbott's changes to the Social Workers Code of Conduct. And they actually reversed it. So that's great. And that's it about me.
Okay, excellent. And really quickly, okay, perfect. Kim, I'm so glad to have a social worker's perspective, because I think that's a really, really important perspective as we talk about why some people vote for Trump. So I'm just so glad you're on. Hope to have you back on Mormon Stories. Thanks for joining us, Kim. All right. Next we have Kevin. Kevin, tell us tell us a little bit about yourself, Kevin.
Yeah, my name's Kevin Lundell. I'm from Ogden, Utah. I'm a chiropractor and gym owner. I am a father of two kids, 8 and 6 years old, and married. And I'm post-Mormon myself, ex-Mormon. And I think my politics have shifted dramatically as a result of my shift out of the church. Excellent.
Excellent. It's so great to have you, Kevin. Thanks for joining us. Is that a CrossFit gym behind you?
Gym formerly known as a CrossFit gym. We actually took the name of CrossFit off in the wake of the CrossFit CEO and founder making some racist statements about George Floyd, or in the wake of the George Floyd incident. So we've distanced ourselves a little bit from CrossFit, but we still do a lot of the same stuff.
Excellent. So glad you're with us. Thanks for joining us, Kevin. All right. I assume it's pronounced Roseanne, right? Roseanne, is it Roseanne?
Roseanne, yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Roseanne.
I was born and raised in Utah. Grew up in Cedar City. My husband and I met while we were missionaries in France in the 1970s, and I have 3 adult children, one of whom is a Trump supporter, and I laughingly tell him I don't know what I did wrong raising you, and I have 6 grandchildren. I'm a retired public school teacher. I taught theater for 30 years, and I have a master's degree in counseling, although I taught for 30 years instead. I'm 67 years old. I live in Walnut Creek, California. My husband and I left the Mormon church 20 plus years ago, and then we resigned from the church after that horrific November policy several years ago. I come from a large devout family. My father worked for church education system his whole career. I'm the second of 10 children. My ancestors were pioneers, polygamists, the whole thing. I was a Republican by default until I was in my mid-30s when I really started paying attention. And I thought to myself, I'm not a Republican, I'm a Democrat. And so since my mid-30s, I've been a Democrat.
Excellent. And you're in Carolyn Pearson's neck of the woods, is that right?
I am, yep. Carolyn was in my ward back when I had a ward, and she's my good friend, yeah.
Well, we love Carolyn Pearson, and so glad to have you, Roseanne. Thanks for joining us. All right, I'm super excited for the first time to have my dear friend Gerardo joining us. Gerardo is the guy responsible for making my camera and my lighting and a lot of the thumbnails that we use on YouTube and Facebook. He's a graphic designer. He's a dear friend, and he represents really important groups that I wanted on this episode. So Gerardo, thank you so much for joining us on Mormon Stories, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I was born and raised in Mexico. I served an LDS mission in Mexico City, and shortly after I moved to the US with a student visa and went to BYU, Idaho. And after graduating BYU, Idaho, well, now I live in Utah. I'm married to my husband, so I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And although I can't vote because I'm not a citizen, my husband voted, and we both hold, he's a US citizen, and we both hold like pretty similar or virtually the same political views regarding US politics.
But also as an immigrant, Gerardo, I just really love, so much of the discourse around Donald Trump has been around immigration. And so I'm just so delighted to have someone from Mexico who's an immigrant, who's able to speak to those issues along with all the other things you can speak about. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm just so delighted.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Next is my dear friend, Jeff Gardner. Jeff, tell us a little bit about yourself. I'm so glad to have you on Mormon Stories.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jeff Gardner. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, although it's probably the one corner of Salt Lake or Utah that doesn't feel like Utah at all. Trump supporters are not to be found in our neighborhood, nor are Mormons, really, for that matter. But what else? I grew up in Salt Lake. I grew up Republican, went to BYU, graduated from BYU as still a Republican, kind of made my transition as I got into medical school and started to see how the healthcare system was working or not working for many people. I'm now an emergency physician and have been for the last 18 years. And mid 2000s is kind of when I started to transition. Obama was the first Democrat I voted for and have voted Democrat pretty much since then. I'm sure we'll get into specific reasons, but that's kind of
and also Jeff, I'm so one of the things I love about the reason why you're here, you've really studied the COVID issues inside and out. Is that correct?
Tried to.
Yeah.
We're all doing it blindly. So,
Well, I love that I can have a physician comment on his perspective on the COVID situation, and frankly on Obamacare and on healthcare, right? Because that's a big issue that's confronting a lot of people. So Jeff, so great to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Okay, Donna Cox, you are next on my video panel. Donna, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm from South Bend, Indiana. My husband and I have been here 12 years. We moved here from Hawaii. We've kind of lived all over the country. I'm 64. I have 6 kids. I have 6 grandchildren. Been a Democrat all my life. My father was a civil rights activist. I grew up in New York. Martin Luther King was in our home, John Lewis. The Jordans who started Habitat were all friends of my dad's. So that's in my DNA. 4 of our kids are adopted. I'm a nurse by education, a realtor by profession. My husband and I were foster parents for over 30 years. We adopted 4 special needs kids. So I'm pro-choice because I've seen firsthand what it's like to have children who are not wanted and involved in a very broken system. So I'm very strongly pro-choice because I feel like until we start taking care of the children who are actually already born and here and treat them humanely, that, you can't very well say you're pro life if you don't actually respect and take care of the children that are already here.
Beautiful. I'm so glad. What an amazing upbringing to be able to have exposure to some of those amazing civil rights leaders at such an early age, Donna. So glad you could join us. Thanks for coming. All right, Quentin, tell us a little bit about yourself, Quentin. And I'm super excited that you represent the active LDS sort of wing a little bit, although none of us really represent anything, but I'm just glad to know.
Yes, I remain active in the church, though I've been through probably over the last decade or so a long evolution of my faith. I've listened to your podcast for many years. I would characterize it in terms of recent guests. I really enjoyed Carl Youngblood, who talked about Mormon transhumanism. I would say my beliefs probably overlap significantly with his. So I remain in the church, and I'm trying to be the change I want to see. In terms of, so general life background, I'm in my late 40s. I grew up in Colorado. I currently live in Lubbock, Texas. The reason to live in Lubbock, Texas is the university here. I am married to a professor at Texas Tech University. She's in education. She teaches education, the use of technology in education, et cetera. I am myself an engineer. Trained as an electrical engineer, currently work as a data scientist, and we are the parents of 2 teenagers. So in terms of my politics, I grew up in a home where Cleon Skousen was the world's foremost leading expert on the American Constitution. So that was kind of the default background I came from. I voted Republican for a long time. I, in the late 90s, married a Democrat. I think that was a very worthwhile exercise I eventually shifted my views, but for about 5 years, we basically canceled each other's votes out in elections. And I actually think that was really important phase of our marriage, to be able to disagree with somebody that you love and respect and understand that their political points of view and beliefs came from real thought. And look, I've met plenty of people on both sides of the political spectrum who I feel like are just taking beliefs that they've kind of taken for granted and haven't given them a great deal of thought. But it was very useful for me to basically discuss with my wife early in our marriage our differences and understand why she thought the way she did. And it's helpful we need more constructive dialogue than that. I would say I voted in 2000 for George Bush the first time for a number of reasons, including, of course, his reckless decision to go to war. I couldn't vote a second time for him, so I eventually supported John Kerry. I've voted basically Democrat ever since then, although I consider myself moderate, only a little bit left of center, and I think the Republican perspective is important. We need two viable parties, and I kind of worry about the state of the Republican Party right now. But we can perhaps get into that later.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Quentin. It's so great to have you here. Thanks for joining. Donna Kelly, I am so thrilled to have you on Mormon Stories. I've wanted to have you on. There are probably 10 topics I could bring you on to Mormon Stories podcast for, but I'm not sad. I'm not sad that this is a topic I'm having you on for, because I really am dying to hear your perspective. So the Donna Kelly, welcome to Mormon Stories. Oh, sorry, I picked the wrong window. Donna Kelly, welcome to Mormon Stories.
That's the other Donna Kelly. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, tell us about yourself, Donna, for those who don't know.
Okay, so my name's Donna Kelly. I grew up as a part of a Mormon family in southern Arizona. Got married to a non-member, wound up converting him, and he and I moved to Oregon. We had 4 children there in Oregon. They're all adults now. One of them is named Kate Kelly. I don't know if any of Mormon Stories followers recognize that name, but she was excommunicated from the Mormon Church in June of 2014 for starting a group called Ordained Women, pushing for the ordination of women. We moved to Utah in 2002, right after the Olympics. My husband got a job. He was the head of the communications department at BYU. And that was quite an experience itself. I grew up Republican as part of a family that was big Republican Party. My husband grew up Republican, and his father was a Republican state senator in North Dakota. So they were big Republicans. But over the years, I've just gradually become more and more left of center, just because, and kind of the final straw for me was the Iraq War and the whole weapons of mass destruction thing that was, not really true. And I started voting for Democrats more and more after that. And the Democratic Party aligns more with my philosophy of life, on so many issues. And so I'm very happily big supporter of the Democratic Party now. So I'm a prosecutor by trade. I've been a prosecutor since 1990. I started as a prosecutor of sexual assault and domestic violence cases, and I've kind of stayed in that field. I've only taken a few brief hiatuses from that since 1990. So I've probably worked with about 5,000 victims of sexual assault and domestic violence over the years, and find it very rewarding, frustrating, challenging, all of those things all at once. So that's another reason I'm a big, huge fan of Joe Biden, because of his, we can get into that later, but he authored the Violence Against Women Act in the early 1990s and has been a champion of the fight against domestic violence and sexual assault. So that's my career kind of influenced me to support Joe Biden.
Got it. Okay, perfect. Donna, so thrilled to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Ryan, tell us a bit about yourself. And let me unmute you. Go ahead, Ryan.
All right. Thank you, John. I appreciate this opportunity. I just want to say I was listening, not to all of it, but to lots of the conversation earlier from the panel this morning. And I want to thank them and appreciate hearing their perspective. I really am grateful for what you're doing here. So I'm Ryan Harvey, 35 years old. After hearing some of these other introductions, I kind of feel underqualified, but I'm happy to be here. I live in West Point City, which is about 30 miles north of Salt Lake County. I was born in Canada. My dad and his family are all Canadians, but but raised most of my life here in the United States, in Utah. I come from pioneer Mormon stock on both sides of the family. I have a large family out of around 70 cousins or so. I think only 2 maybe that I know of are out of the church. So I come from a very Mormon family, have always lived in very Mormon cities growing up. I did study political science at Weber State University. By default, I was a Republican, as some others have said here, and that political science degree was really when my mind started opening up that maybe I wasn't really Republican, or at least I didn't espouse lots of the Republican views. And I went on to get my master's of public administration at the University of Kansas. So you can see my Jayhawk hat in the background. And I work now at the city of West Point as the finance director. My Mormon background, I've always been a devout Mormon up until about a little over a year ago, when I read the CES letter, and my wife and children and I all decided to leave the church. And so now we are post-Mormons. And yeah, that's about it.
All right. Rock chalk.
Rock chalk. Right.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Ryan. All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to have each panelist discuss, let's just say, 3 of the main reasons they voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And as a second part to that question, if to any extent their Mormonism and or their post-Mormonism influenced those decisions, I want to make sure we incorporate a Mormon element. There are a couple participants that are going to have to either leave us early or come in and out. And so I'm going to start with 1 or 2 of them. And so first, Jeff Gardner, let's start with you. Jeff, tell us 3 main reasons why you decided to vote for Biden and Harris. And let me unmute you really quick. Okay. You're unmuted.
There we go.
Go for it.
Okay. These are a little bit related. I'll try to be brief. I think my first transition towards the Democrats in general, as I said before, I was an economics major in college. And I remember as I graduated from BYU, Muhammad Yunus spoke at our commencement, and he said that poverty was a problem that we just didn't have the collective will to solve yet. And so that was the first idea where I thought, I believe in this Zion society where there's no poor among us, but I kind of just tacitly accept that there are always going to be poor among us, that we can't solve that. And so that's when I first started getting interested. Moving on to medical school a few years later, it really struck me how inefficient our healthcare system is. And from an economics only perspective, how much sunk cost goes into delivering healthcare in the way we've chosen to do it, where it's not really benefiting us as a whole, and we're just wasting money. So kind of the combination of all of that got me thinking, we're not doing things right. And as I looked back, Hillary Clinton was the first one who even talked about healthcare reform, and then it just kind of got ignored. And I watched the Republican administration, this is Bush second, and they kind of ignored it. They had a chance to address it. And then Obama comes in, and Mitch McConnell's first move is, I'm not going to vote for, he's completely obstructionist. So that was really frustrating to me as a doctor, thinking this is a big problem that's not going away. I'm all in favor of hearing a variety of solutions, but I'm only hearing solutions from one side. And when Obama comes forth with what is essentially a conservative solution, all there is obstruction. And so that I watched the Republican side. Quentin mentioned something about the Republican perspective devolving into this obstructionist, power grabbing, non-solution solving entity. And I'm very much in favor of a strong conservative voice in the world. But I feel like Donald Trump has destroyed that, one. But I think it preceded him. I think he's just amplified it. So I just feel like the Democrats are the ones that are interested in solving the problem. And as soon as I hear an option from a Republican, I'm happy to listen. But Trump had 2 years of promising us something better than ACA and did nothing about it. And I just see 4 more years of that. So that's a big reason why I was going Democrat. I would have voted for Kanye over Trump, honestly. I mean, I think an anti-Trump vote is completely appropriate at this point. Now, why did I go to Biden? I feel like we are so divided right now. And I felt like there were a couple of voices on the Democratic side. My problem with Sanders, as much as I'm impressed with his purity and his ideological, his ideological purity and just not really being sacrificed to special interests, he does a lot of yelling and not a lot of problem solving. That's what I feel like he's coming across as. And I felt like we need a bridge builder in the country. And Biden is one of the small group. There are 3 that kind of appealed to me. He wasn't my first choice, but he was in the top few just because I felt like we need a moderate voice. I respect Sanders. I love a lot of what he thinks. I love a lot of what Elizabeth Warren thinks, but I just don't feel like it was the right time for that. And I feel like we need a uniter. Hopefully I'm right in that. Hopefully we can do something with this and we can get access to this centrist vote, which I really probably fall in politically. But yeah, that's really my biggest reason for Biden. I feel like he's the most centrist choice we had at the end, and he's very good at working across the aisle. So that's my 2 cents on why I like Biden. I have a lot more to say about other stuff. That's my brief one.
Just because in some ways, Jeff, you've been on the front lines of the COVID thing, tell us to what extent the COVID, Trump's handling of the COVID situation has been influential for you.
Okay, so I won't pick on Trump to the extent that some liberals will, in that I think this would have been an impossible situation for any president to deal with. We were going in blindly. What I would have appreciated, and I do think there were local variations that I thought a lot of liberal voices were sort of ignoring. I felt like people in New York were wanting rural Utah to act just like people in New York City were. And really the approach at that time was different, and no one seemed to be acknowledging that. So I feel like, just to give him a tiny bit of credit, I feel like there is some local variation, and locally coordinated response was appropriate. I felt like a lot of Democrat voices were missing that. However, if Trump had just been, on the other hand, he just dropped the very simple ball of just saying, hey, follow your community leaders. This is their gig. This is what they know about. Trust the scientists. I would have had a very different review. From the beginning, he's been palpably against science. He's been his view on masks has been here and there. There's just a lot of stuff that has been pretty consensus that he's just kind of had this open disdain for. And that's been really frustrating. Politically, I don't know that, it's asking a lot to handle 50 different states with such a wide range of needs and political opinions. That's asking a lot for a president to coordinate that. But even the very simple stuff, I feel like he's completely dropped the ball on.
Okay, excellent.
That was much more about him than it was about Americans.
Jeff, tell us if to what extent your Mormonism or post-Mormonism influences your political thinking. I'm just curious about that.
So I made my shift. So I kind of left Mormonism 2008, 2009, 2010. I made my shift to the Democratic Party. 2008 was the first election I voted Democrat. So it preceded my shift out of Mormonism. One of my problems with Mormonism is this kind of us versus them that had formed. We are united against everyone outside of us. I didn't like that dynamic in the church. And I feel like, if I'm going to connect my disdain for Trump, it's in that same vein. There's a lot of us versus them thinking, and not let's come together, let's come to an agreement, let's make everyone happy. I love Joe's rhetoric, at least in that sense. It may be all lip service, we'll see, but I think even just lip service and rhetoric has value. And Trump has demonstrated how harmful language can be. So if all it is lip service, fine. If it's more, I hope it is.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, thanks for joining us. I'm excited to have you, and thanks for that introduction. Kevin, I know you've got to leave earlier than some of the others, so I'm going to go ahead and go to you next. Kevin, tell us 3 or so of the main reasons you voted for Biden, or will vote for Biden.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, John, thanks for having me on. I would say my 3 reasons are economic issues, racial issues, and social issues. And let me tell you what I mean by that. I really think on the ballot in 2020 is whether or not the United States of America is going to be a multiracial and multicultural democracy. I think Trump and the GOP have shown that they don't really want this. They've shown that they want to consolidate power and wealth among the white Christian elite, and they've shown that by giving tax cuts to the wealthy, by banning Muslims from entering the country from certain Muslim countries, from excluding transgender folks from the military, by separating families at the border. Trump has explicitly said he wants less people of color in the suburbs, while also refusing to condemn white supremacy. And on the opposite side of that, we have the Democratic Party. And in order for the Democratic Party to win elections, they have to bring together a multiracial, multicultural coalition. And because they have to do that, they have to govern in a very similar way, where they have to push power downward and outward to that coalition. And you know what? I believe Joe Biden is the right person at this time to help do that and to win this election. Like you, John, Biden was not my first choice coming out of the Democratic nomination process, but I do think that he can be and will be a uniting force. That he's a good person. He cares about a lot of the same issues that I care about, and I think he can be that person that wins this election, and we can start anew here in January with a new president.
And do you feel like your Mormonism or post-Mormonism has influenced, your politics?
Without a doubt, John. I lived in the Bay Area, California during Prop 8, and I was a true believing Mormon. And I was going to chiropractic college at the time, and I was, telling my friends that they needed to vote yes on 8, and yes on 8 was going to make gay marriage illegal in the state of California. And coming back from that experience, I came to school the next day after that proposition was passed, and the feeling was so heavy. We're in chiropractic college in the Bay Area. I mean, we're talking about a fairly large LGBTQ population and a progressive student body. And, there was some anger, and a lot of that anger was directed at the Mormon community and the Mormon students, because the Mormon church put their thumb on the scale of that election, or of that proposition, and really single-handedly turned that vote, as they told the members that they needed to vote for it, as they told the members to make phone calls and donate money. I mean, we're talking every single Sunday this happened, and throughout the week. It was a huge deal. And after that experience, I sat one-on-one with a friend of mine from my class who was gay, and she called me over to her house. She wanted to talk about it. And I sat across from her and told her that I loved her and that I cared about her, but that I didn't think she should be married. And, I went home after that experience, and I told my wife, everything I know about what is right and what is wrong tells me that experience was wrong. And it was really the first crack in my Mormonism. It was really the first time that I had stepped outside of my own learned experience and really honestly put myself in someone else's shoes. And having done that going forward, after that, and also binging on a bunch of Mormon Stories podcasts, I led me out of the church. And as I put myself in more situations where I could learn from other people's experience and step out of my own learned experience, had led me to find myself going towards the Democratic Party, who cares more about these issues.
Beautiful. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for that introduction. It's so good to have you, and that's a really valuable perspective. So
one more thing, John, if I might.
Yeah, please.
I did give John's permission to do this, but because I've stepped outside of my own learned experience, and it has really influenced my life and changed my views, I started a podcast where we where we have conversations with people from vulnerable or otherwise marginalized communities, and we hear their experiences and their stories and seek to learn from them. The podcast is called Community Spread. So if you want to check that out, you can find it on any of your podcast apps. Community Spread.
Brilliant.
Thanks, John.
Thanks for raising your voice, Kevin.
Appreciate you.
All right, Donna Kelly, let's get you in next. Donna, tell us some of the main reasons.
Okay, well, how long do I have? Like 3 hours? No, my top two choices when the Democratic primary was happening
I was saying you can do 3 if
Sorry.
you want.
Okay. My top 2 choices during the Democratic primary are now the nominees, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And I kind of might have preferred for her to be on the top of the ticket, but I'm happy that they're both there. I have been huge fans of them both for many years. Joe Biden, the primary issue that I have been dedicated my career and my life to, which is the fighting of sexual assault and domestic violence, Joe Biden has been a champion in that fight for 40 years. And he not only, when you talk about, he's got good rhetoric, Joe Biden has good rhetoric, but he also works hard for what he believes in. And I can't tell you how many times I have attended national or international conferences concerning sexual assault and domestic violence and other women's issues. And he's been there as a speaker, as a participant, listening to ideas, and he's been a fight in this area of one of the most important areas, even for the state of Utah. We've got some really high numbers for domestic violence, well above the national average in sexual assault. So he not only has good rhetoric, he fights for what he believes in. He works hard at it. He seeks to find people that will join with him on both sides of the aisle. And so he's a very effective leader. And, he helped lead this country out of the recession in 2008. Those kind of things, I think, are what our country needs right now. Working together with other people, regardless of their philosophies, of finding compromise. I think compromise has become a dirty word in politics today, and I don't know why. Compromise is a good thing. It gets us where we need to go as a society, and he's very good at that, working with people, finding common ground, and coming up with results. One of the other reasons that I support Joe Biden and Senator Harris is that they are both intentionally inclusive in their approach to every issue. They want to include voices from all walks of life and people with lived experiences in various, walks of life. And Joe Biden has shown that in his, since he's been the nominee, he has chosen people that are, from all different walks of life to join the fight with him. And I think, if Mormons truly believe that tenet that all are alike unto God, we should be intentionally inclusive of people that aren't like us, that represent different lifestyles, different backgrounds, different races, different philosophies. If we really believe all are alike unto God, then we should support other people that are trying to do work that include and bring together other people. And Biden has shown that. It's not just talk. He has chosen people on his campaign staff and said that he will choose. For example, he said, "I believe we should have a public school teacher running the Department of Education." That's just sounds so basic and simple and almost silly, but that's the kind of person he is he wants to bring in good people that have good, valid experiences that can, make the country better. And so those are my main reasons for supporting them. I think they're just going to be phenomenal because they're both people who have a demonstrated record. Biden has been a public servant for 54 years, if you count his time in the Senate and his time as a vice president. And he has done phenomenal work. He's respected all over the world. He brought this country, was one of the main people that helped bring this country out of the recession in 2008. And he's, in everything every fight that he joins, he works hard on it. It's not just rhetoric to him. He works hard for women. And that, that fight that he started 40 years ago, he was one of the few leading voices that was willing to speak up for victims of assault and sexual assault and domestic violence. So
I love it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Donna. So great. Really quickly, I'm noticing our stream. Our stream is not as high for this interview as it is for the morning, and I think part of that is social media is more active in the morning than it is in the afternoon. But if any of you listeners want to share this stream, I think this is really useful, valuable information. I think we should have at least as many viewers and listeners for this episode as we did the last one. Please feel free to share this in groups or on social media, wherever you want, because I would love as many people as possible to hear from these wise people. And in my sense, from my followers, two-thirds of my followers are voting for Biden and 1/3 for Trump. So we need to have the viewership on this podcast represent my listeners a little bit. So Gerardo, let's have you go next. Now, I know you're not, as I understand it, I don't believe you're officially a U.S. citizen, but I just love all the perspectives you bring. And again, as you said, your husband is. So tell us 3 reasons you would be maybe vote for Biden if you could, or why you support Biden and not Trump.
Yeah, John. So I think the 3 main reasons would be, the first one, immigration. Immigration has been pretty much a nightmare for us since I married my husband. We started the paperwork for going from a student visa to be able to have a permanent residency. And Trump's administration's policies have made it a nightmare and completely, like, super difficult to immigrate to the United States. It was already difficult. Like and I think U.S. citizens don't really have a perspective on this. A lot of them don't, because I remember going at BYU, Idaho. Most of my friends were American citizens, and they would just ask me, "Oh, why don't you just apply for citizenship?" And I would be like, "Do you know what that entails? Like, that's just." Unless you're marrying a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident, it's like virtually impossible to get a U.S. citizenship. And Trump has made it even harder by putting a lot of restrictions and a lot of policies that have elongated the process. Just to give you into perspective, before, when you married a U.S. citizen, the process would take around 6 months to get your permanent residency. Right now, it's taking up to 3 years. So we're right now still on that process of waiting. And you're kind of like in limbo, not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing what immigration is going to come back with, or what they're going to tell you. So all these policies has really affected us personally, and affected a lot of my friends and people that I know of that have tried to immigrate to the United States, and trying to do it legally. Like I'm talking legal immigration it's very hard nowadays. And I watch a lot of immigration lawyers YouTube channels, and they are always they're always coming up with YouTube videos about new policies that the Trump administration is putting on to make it harder for immigrants to immigrate, and to make legal immigration harder. This has made the USCIS, which is the organization that is in charge of all these processes, to really struggle. And pretty much they were, just a few months ago, they were saying they were going to have to furlough, I think it was 2/3 of their employees, because so many people can't immigrate, so there's not enough applications, and that's how they survive, through the money of the applications. So they were gonna have to furlough 2/3 of their employees, because they just didn't have enough resources anymore, and this would make the process even longer. And this is, a lot of people speculate that this is pretty much what the Trump administration has always, like, that was their intent. But I don't know. So that's one of the first ones why we are strong Biden supporters. Biden has pledged to remove all Trump administration's policies on immigration and pretty much going back to what it was and making the policies better instead of just harder for no reason. Then the second one would be LGBTQ issues. And I know there's a lot of debate on this, but I've read several of the cases that the Trump administration has brought to the Supreme Court and other LGBTQ issues that the Trump administration has been involved with. And to me, it's just outrageous how they try to set LGBTQ rights back. And the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett has really worried us and many of my friends who are part of the LGBTQ community. And just to give you some examples, on November, I think it's November 4th, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing on this case that the Trump administration is being part of, where an adoption agency from Philadelphia who is affiliated to the Catholic Church but receives tax funding, they want to maintain or keep discriminating against LGBTQ couples. And the state of Philadelphia removed pretty much their rights to manage the adoptions, and they're taking the case to the Supreme Court with the help of the Trump administration to pretty much ask the Supreme Court that because of religious reasons, adoption agencies could potentially have the right to discriminate against same-sex couples. And with this new nomination, to me, I really think it's going to go towards what the Trump administration wants. And obviously, Biden's views on that are completely different. They're going more towards equality and LGBTQ rights, and so that's another of the main reasons. And the third one, I think, would be abortion. I am pro-choice, and that's something that has changed quite a bit since my experience transitioning. My faith transition has made my views on abortion change, and I'm pro-choice, and I know that's something that Biden supports.
Love it. Thanks, Gerardo. So glad you're here. Love your perspective. A lot of commenters are thanking you and our previous commenters for everything they've shared. So thanks for being on with us.
Yeah, thank you.
Roseanne, what are your top reasons? Let me unmute you really quick. Okay, I've unmuted you. Go ahead.
So when I started college in 1971, most Mormon girls just went to college until they found themselves a husband. But in case you didn't find someone, you either became a teacher or a secretary or a nurse. I thought, well, I'll do the teacher route. And I'm glad I did, because I really loved my teaching career. And that is probably one thing that has had one of the largest effects on me for why I became liberal. There's a statistic that says roughly 70% of teachers are liberal. And I think that might be because you're working with children and you're seeing how what the government does affects children. For example, in my classroom, before I retired, having to do those active shooter drills with my little children and trying to say, this isn't to scare you, just so you're ready. To have to even do that just really upset every teacher I know, because, and over the years, more and more, there were more school shootings, and that all has to do with gun control. And the fact to me, it seems to me that Republicans care more about their right to have their guns than they do about our children's safety at school. And when they started that ridiculous stuff President Trump did, well, we'll have teachers armed. I don't know any teacher that wants to carry a gun to school. That is crazy. Another thing is, as a theater teacher for 30 years in middle school, I had a lot of little boys that were just starting to figure out that, oh my gosh, I think I'm gay, as they went into adolescence. And being in a position to make a safe place for them and a place where all children felt like they mattered, I thought our government needs to do this, not just our teachers. We need to have a government that supports the right of all children to grow up and flourish how they are and being who they are. And having students that lived in their cars because they had no home, or they would come to school and the secretary would have to feed them breakfast. The fact that we live in the most wealthy country in the world and we still have children who are going to bed hungry and living in cars. And I live in a wealthy community here in Northern California, and we still had children. I'm sure it's just much, much worse with COVID. And now I look at how all of our teachers are just stepping up. A lot of my friends are still teaching, and my son is a teacher, but hearing how they're doing distance learning and what good things teachers are doing with our Republican leaders kind of making it like, no, the teachers want to go back to work. They I feel like we need to take better care of our children. And as I became a Democrat, I started thinking, it's not just the children I know. It's not my own children, my own grandchildren. All children are my children and our children. And we need to do a much better job of taking care of them. I remember when President Trump was starting to detain families at the border and he was taking children away from their parents. There was, I was trying to find the name this morning, I couldn't, but there was a Republican congressman who was questions about that. And he said, well, those aren't our children. And that just made me sick. I think a civilized country takes care of the children. We take care of our children by making sure that they will have a world to inherit that is habitable. That they're going to, I love that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are talking about having universal preschool and even talking about paying for community college for kids, because we know that education is really the way that people are going to do well in this world. So I think a lot of why I went toward becoming a liberal, and I probably am way far of center. I'm probably almost a socialist, because I think we as civilized human beings need to make sure that the basic needs of all of the people in our civilization, especially the vulnerable ones, the children, those that suffer from mental health issues or anything else, we as civilized people need to take care of them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Roseanne. What a bunch of great reasons. Thank you for sharing. Kim, let's have you go next. And I'm going to unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I realized when everybody was introducing themselves that I forgot to say my conversion from conservative to Democrat. Would you mind if I went ahead and did that now too? Okay, so growing up, my mother had a boyfriend in the house, and I actually got my phone taken away because I had CNN News on my phone and kind of liked some of the things that Obama was doing, and that was a lot of contention in the house for me. So I kind of just learned how to be quiet about it all. But I always really had democratic tendencies since the beginning. And when I was in the church and living in the Houston area, I had friends who accepted that part of me as being Democratic, and were actually Democratic themselves. When I moved back to a small town, members were less accepting of the fact that there were of Democrat people who had Democratic beliefs. And something as a social worker I hope to cultivate in myself is having unconditional positive regard for people. And that was something that I feel was not given to me by a lot of conservatives. So I make sure to try especially hard when I have these debates with people that I attack the argument, not the person. And that same, people don't give me the same, what's it called? I'm trying to think. They don't give me the same, courtesy. Yes, thank you. They don't give me the same courtesy. And that was hard. And so I really try to just make sure that I still, people aren't their political ideologies, they're people. And so I mean, even like the guy who confirmed me as a member of the church, like has attacked people who are Democrats. So that was definitely hard, but I do have members who still support me, and my friends are still my friends through everything. And so that's that. So moving on. So the 3 things I like about Biden, I like that he's creating more tax expenditures that the middle class can take a part in. I read this book called The Submerged State in one of my social policy classes, and it just talks about how the tax expenditures when it comes to real estate and all of these other things, the more you make, the higher the home you buy, all these things, the bigger cuts you're going to get. And if you can't afford a home, and stuff like that, like you can't take part in them. So I like that he's creating more tax expenditures that the middle class people can take part in. Like he wants to raise the child tax credit. I know there was a video circling on Facebook of somebody saying that Biden wants to take away Trump's raise for child tax credit and everything. And yes, he wants to do away with the bill that allowed that Trump put out, but he also is replacing it with something that actually raises the child tax credit. Another thing that I like in his policies is that he wants to create a tax credit for $15,000 for first-time home buyers for their down payment for their houses, allowing more people to be able to partake in the expenditures they get from being homeowners. Which I think would be great. Another thing is that he wants to cap insurance premiums at 8.5% for people in the middle class, and I love that about him. And basically, like I'm a lot more progressive, especially as somebody as a social work student. But I think the biggest threat to our country right now is internally, and I think it is the partisan gridlock that we see right now. I think our country needs someone who can end that. And if I want the gridlock to end, like I can't vote for someone who's Trump, who's basically pushing that. So yeah, those are my 3 reasons why I definitely support Biden.
Excellent. Super helpful. Thank you so much, Kim. Ryan, let's have you go.
All right, am I unmuted now? Yep. So, like with the others, I could go on for hours talking about this, but I'll try to keep it brief. The number one reason why I'm voting for Biden is that I feel that Biden and Harris is I feel that they represent the underserved and the underprivileged groups in society more than Trump does, especially LGBTQ community. The Black and brown minority community and women. The second reason is just human decency. I feel that we've lost that from our president. One of the things that's hard for me when I hear he's not a politician. And the reason that bothers me is, I went to school and studied political science. I think there's a way that you're supposed to act as a politician, and that's someone who brings people together, someone who has language that is inclusive, as others have stated. And I feel that he's not a politician is giving Trump an excuse to say whatever he wants about anyone at any time and just excusing that. And that's something that I can't stand for. And so human decency, some others have said, maybe it's just lip service. But it is the language. It's the language of inclusivity. And that's not only Democrats. George Bush and other Republican presidents of the past haven't had that type of language. They've had the inclusive language. And so that's something that I've seen with the current president that's has me worried. And then the third one is science. That from my perspective, I see Biden and Harris and the Democrat Party as a whole as embracing science a lot more. You see it very a clear example that we all are dealing with right now is the masks. The science says that if we wear masks and social distance, that's what's going to stop the spread of the virus. Well, it took Trump months and months to finally wear a mask and finally encourage others to wear a mask, where Biden was doing it from the beginning. And I feel that relying on the science is an important thing to do when we're trying to protect the public as a whole. So those are probably my three main reasons. And how it relates to Mormonism, it's very intertwined with my story. So as I started studying political science at Weber State University, I started realizing that maybe I'm not a Republican, or maybe I don't support everything that's Republican, right? So that was kind of the first step. And as I was very, very into the church at that time, a TBM. And as I studied the scriptures, I studied the words of Christ, I could not reconcile what was going on in lots of the policies of the Republican Party with Christ's teachings. Now, the abortion issue was something that held me, kept me from going all in, as well as the LGBTQ, the stances that the church had on those types of issues helped me, or prevented me from going all in as a Democrat, as a liberal. But I started having that crack. But what really was probably the biggest shelf item before I actually read the CES letter and left the church, the biggest shelf item was the election of 2016, when I could see this man, Donald Trump, who, from all of my reading of the scriptures, was the exact opposite of a person that I felt that Christ was and that the church was teaching me to be. And when he got elected, and I looked around, I live in Utah, I looked around and saw all my, the Mormons who had so heavily supported him and continued to support him despite, like, I can understand why you would vote for him based on certain policies, but I saw many members of the church continuing to support everything he said, excusing away the sexist remarks he made, excusing away everything he did. And that was a big shelf item for me. And so when I read the CES letter and left the church about a little over a year ago, it gave me permission to fully embrace liberalism. And I can I can say now that I'm a bleeding heart liberal. Like, that is my stance. Like, I stand with those groups that I wasn't able to stand with as a member of the church. And it was so freeing. And so this is the first election where I can actually really vote how I really feel inside. And it's 100% Biden. Biden represents all of those values that I hold dear, that I don't see from the other candidate.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was outstanding. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks.
Donna, I think you're next. Donna Cox. Let me unmute you really quick and tell us your feelings and thoughts. Three or so reasons.
Well, I would say my, golly, there's so many reasons. Where do you start? I guess probably, I don't believe in trickle-down economics. I can tell you that I was a single mom with 2 children, and I know what it's like to go to bed hungry. I know what it's like to worry about how I'm going to keep the lights on. I'm a poster child for government assistance that kept me afloat until I could get on my feet. I was able to access WIC, which kept my kids fed. I got a government subsidized first-time homebuyer loan to buy a house, which kept a roof over our heads while I was building my career and digging us out of poverty and putting us in a better situation. I can tell you that I, along with my now husband of 35 years, we worked our rear ends off. And as a small business owner, I'm a realtor and I own my own business. You know, I'm in the top percent probably in the country of income wise, but I feel like that for those of us who much is given, much is required. And so I've always felt like it was a privilege to pay taxes. I feel like, you know, I owe my country my participation in the tax system because my country supported me when I needed it. My children are now, you know, in the six-figure incomes because they were fed and taken care of, and we did not live in horrible poverty while I was single. And so they got a good education. They went to good schools. I support public education. I'm sickened by the continuous effort to take funds away from public school. I'm a public school recipient. My kids have all been in public schools. I think the more that you take away from public schools, the worse off we get. I believe that the environment is something that we have to protect. I've always been a tree hugger. I think we all have a responsibility to participate and take care of the environment, and I don't see the Republican Party giving two flips about the environment. I think they're in denial of climate change, and I think if we don't have a planet left, then none of it's going to matter. And then lastly, I would say my family looks like the United Nations. So, you know, we have children who are Filipino. We have a foster son who's African American. I have two autistic children. One of my daughters is pansexual. Another one of my daughters is gay and an artist. So I think we represent a pretty diverse part of the population. And, you know, my family isn't lily white. So, you know, we're directly impacted by some of this racist rhetoric that has become, I mean, I think Trump has given a license for that, for people to come out from under their rocks and just be the worst of what our country represents instead of the best of what our country represents. And so I need civility to come back. I need to be able to, you know, live in a country where it's okay for my children to be different from other people. You know, I agree with what some of the others have said. There's nothing Christ-like about what I've seen in the current political state. It's as bad as opposite of what I was taught as you can get, and it's sickening, and I need it to stop. I need sanity to come back. I will tell you one fun story. My father just passed away. He was 94 years old, and as I said, he was a civil rights activist. He was a pastor for 74 years. I'll maybe circle back to how I made a brain fart and joined the Mormon church, but he was determined after my mom died 6 weeks ago that he was going to live long enough to cast his vote to vote Trump out of office. So he cast his vote on Thursday morning went into a coma Thursday night and died 2 days later, but he got that vote cast. Oops. John, you're muted.
Donna, such beautiful story. Thanks for sharing such personal, heartwarming, sensitive things. Your insight, your commentary is all beautiful. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Quentin, I think you're last but not least for this round.
Okay. Yeah. So, ordinarily, if we were dealing with any other Republican nominee, these would all be points of policy, and I will get to points of policy. But it turns out that Trump has illustrated that there are some much more basic qualifications in terms of fitness for office. I've thought a lot about the Bush presidency because that was the thing that kind of switched me from Republican to Democrat. I felt like George Bush always understood his limitations and understood the importance of listening to advisors. But I think he got very bad advice. And ultimately, part of the job of president is listening to that advice and then, being the decider, as George Bush liked to say, being the decider and making a smart decision based on that advice, and being smart enough to recognize when you're getting bad advice and taking advice from different sources. And that was sort of, as I see it, George Bush's ultimate failing. So Trump sort of takes all of this to a completely new level. Aside from the dishonesty and corruption and all of that, just so many really basic things like reading security briefings and, not contradicting the experts that work for the government that have spent their careers working on stuff, whether it's, intelligence, foreign policy, or science during a pandemic. Like, this all seems like such really basic stuff. And Trump's narcissism seems to make him feel like he's the expert on all of these things and that he basically has final authority to just contradict anybody he wants, say what he wants, try and bend reality to his will simply by saying it. Some of the falsehoods that he says, I honestly can't tell if he's just intentionally lying or if he even cares what the truth actually is. So at some basic level, truth matters, and sort of living in the real world and running a normal organization. This is not a small family real estate business. This is a organization with millions of employees that he's running. And, just firing everybody who disagrees with you is a bad way to run a government. So that's point number one. And I would argue that that's consistent with principles that have always been taught in Mormonism in terms of choosing good leaders. My other points would be, so number one, I align heavily with Jeff on healthcare policy. That one's not so much, that one has less to do with my Mormonism, and I will probably push that aside and pick two others, but I'll just say I like what he said, and that I think fundamentally it was my engineer sensibilities that kind of took over and said, this is just a ridiculously inefficient way of running things. It doesn't cover everybody, it costs way too much, and it's just kind of a mess. And yes, I too am waiting for a Republican alternative. Ultimately, Obamacare was actually the Republican alternative. It was proposed, the structure of it was proposed by the Heritage Foundation in the 1990s. It was adopted as, now nicknamed Romneycare in Massachusetts under Governor Mitt Romney. And as I see it, the Republican Party is sort of in their making a short-term choice to oppose that in 2009 for short-term political gain. They've essentially painted themselves into a corner here, that because we've already adopted the Republican solution, they're against it. And so that's why we've gone a decade without them offering a solution. So I'll go on to two other points that I do think my Mormonism is related to. One of them is immigration. I feel like my experience as a missionary and actually also experience as a home teacher. In times past, I've been a home teacher to people from immigrant communities, both for, Latin American immigrants as well as African immigrants. I remember talking to an African immigrant about, why he hadn't been going to church. And, ultimately I came to understand that he was feeling residual discrimination at church and didn't really feel particularly comfortable. And I think that taught me a lot of empathy. And ultimately, I want this to continue to be a nation of immigrants. As Gerardo pointed out, It's not just illegal immigration anymore. Trump and a lot of other people have been complaining about illegal immigration, but this administration has taken tremendous steps to restrict legal immigration, both in the changes Gerardo talked about with the so-called Muslim ban, which in order to make it legal, we had to include some Christian countries. So Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, now has a complete and total ban on their citizens traveling to this country. Like, explain to me, how is that rational? That's about reducing the flow of immigrants from countries with people of color. Likewise, refugees have been restricted. They've been cut by about 90%. So, you know, maybe they don't like illegal immigration, but they're taking every step possible to restrict legal immigration. And this country needs immigrants. We have an aging population. Let's increase our workforce. It's good for the economy. Immigrants are net contributors to the economy. All of the economic research shows that. And ultimately, I would say the solution to illegal immigration is to make it easier for those people to come here legally. If we had an easy process for a poor person in Central America to come here and apply for legal residence, I believe almost all of them would do it. People are complaining about the people using the asylum system as some sort of a loophole. And I would say, yeah, maybe that sort of is a loophole, but the last resort they have. They have nothing more. That's the only possible way they can, unless you're marrying an American or unless you have a relative who's already immigrated, there is no way. We need a modern day Ellis Island where people can come and show up and say, I want to be an American, and get processed and apply. You need to apply in advance. You know, we don't have to go to an Ellis Island scenario. But the reality is we've made it very difficult. I'll just give one other anecdote about immigration. My wife's university department recently tried to hire a postdoctoral fellowship. This is a person who was a non-US citizen who was in the United States on a student visa. She was by far the best qualified candidate for the job. She was offered the job. The Trump administration suddenly changed the requirements for H-1B visas, which is the visa that she would be hired under, and essentially made it impossible for them to hire her. They now have to reopen the job and spend more resources trying to find a different, less qualified candidate for the job. That is not a country that's being welcoming to immigrants. So lastly, I just want to talk about the environment, and I want to say that I think Mormonism made me an environmentalist, and I can think of a couple of things. Number one, really the Boy Scouts. My experience in scouting in my childhood, this would be the 1980s, doing all of the outdoor activities, doing the merit badges in which we talked about the environment. We talked about citizenship. Like that really planted the seeds for me for caring about the environment. And I really believe that protecting the environment should be conservative value. I would remind people that the Environmental Protection Agency was started during the Nixon administration. And I feel like the business interests, specifically the fossil fuel industry, within the Republican Party have sort of won the internal battle and basically made it all about that above all other concerns. And they've sort of abandoned, and of course now more recently questioning science. Another thing about my Mormon experience that sort of helped made me pro-environment was at BYU, I once attended a lecture by a botany professor. This had been in the 90s. The guy's probably retired now. And I remember him talking about how he felt a spiritual duty to protect the earth, that God had created this world and that we had a stewardship for it. And I'll have to say that as I've moved away from sort of taking the scriptures in a literal way, I'm a very non-literal believer now. I increasingly feel that if you talk about God talking to Adam and Eve and telling them to take care of the earth, that is a responsibility given to us. And as I struggle with whether I believe in a literal second coming of Christ, I think we can't take shortcuts and say Jesus is going to come and he's going to fix the problems in the world. We have to fix it ourselves, and that includes our environment. Anyway, sorry if I've gone too long.
No, you brought a lot of wisdom, Quentin, and people are very grateful for your comments, as they are for everyone here. What an amazing panel. I just have to say, this is a brilliant panel, and I'm not just trying to butter you guys up. Okay, I want to move to the next part of this to this portion. Everyone can go ahead and unmute, especially if your rooms are quiet. If you have like fans or engines or loud things, go ahead and mute and then unmute when you talk. But if you have a quiet room, go ahead and unmute. I'm going to do something that may be a little uncomfortable for you guys. I'm going to raise concerns with Biden now. We've given it over an hour, maybe, to why you guys like Biden and Kamala, why you voted for them. I'm going to do what I did in the last Trump conversation that we had earlier this morning. And I'm going to express concerns that either I have or others have for Biden. And I want to have a candid conversation. And what I did last time is when I expressed a criticism, I first want to hear from people that share the criticism, or have that who share that criticism. And then I want to hear people rebut it, but I don't want to immediately sort of have it be where I express a criticism and then it's just attacked, because I try to pick things that at least have some credibility or legitimacy. There may be exceptions to that, but just stick with me here and we'll give this a try. This will be more of an open, free-form discussion than the last one. So the first concern that many people have about Joe Biden is a combination of his age and, let's just say perceptions that he is either not as with it or not as well or not as articulate. This is offensive. Some would say he's too old. So, and I also know that as I understand it, he does experience a bit of stuttering when he speaks, and that can sort of convolute it a little bit. But there's just this basic sense he's probably the oldest president we will have ever had if he's elected, and he's just not. Some people are concerned about his full faculties. Does anybody, first of all, share that concern to any level? I'm curious.
Can I speak to that just real quick?
Wait, do you share that, Donna?
No.
Okay, let's have the people that share it first, and then I want to have the rebuttal. So, Quentin, you raised, and I know that some of this is going to feel offensive, or I know I'm not always as articulate as I want to be in talking about sensitive things, but, let's just do our best. So, Quentin, you said you do share some of those concerns. Tell us.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree. Look, we've got Kamala Harris as backup, so there's that. So I'm not that concerned. What I would say is that, I'm not crazy about the notion of two people in their mid-70s running against each other for president. I think it's obvious to me that Biden does not have dementia, which some people are saying. I do think that he's perhaps not quite as sharp as he was a decade or two ago. I would have preferred that Joe Biden. Like cognitive decline, especially in your 70s, is a real thing. I would say in the case of Joe Biden, I trust him, first of all, to surround himself with good advisors. I also trust him to step down if he felt like he were at the point where he could no longer do it. Like we know now, for example, that in the final year or so of the Reagan administration, he was starting to experience early symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and that was basically hidden from the public. I think I trust Biden to be transparent about that if he did feel like he was starting to experience enough cognitive decline that he wasn't up to the job and that he would step down and let Kamala take the job, and that would be fine. I most certainly wouldn't trust Trump to do that because I feel like his narcissism would prevent him from ever admitting any kind of frailty. Beautiful.
All right. Anybody else share that concern to any level? Ryan, you're raising your hand, and then we want to get Donna in, of course.
Yeah, I mean,
anyone else? Both Donnas. Okay, Ryan.
I definitely do. I mean, if he's in for 8 years, that means he'll be 85 when he leaves office. Actually 86, because I think he's about to turn 78. Anyway, 85 or 86 years old. So I share what Quentin said, that we have a good backup and hopefully he can be transparent about it. But 85, 86 years old is very old. That doesn't prevent me from voting for him over the alternative. But it sure would have been nice if we had some younger blood to choose from. So yes, I definitely share that.
Okay. Anybody else want to share anything on that side before we bring in the Donnas? Okay, let's do Donna Cox and then Donna Kelly. Donna, you want to talk too, right? Donna Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, Donna Cox first.
Well, I was just going to say, so I have MS and I have fibromyalgia. So I get brain fog and I have problems finding words sometimes. In particular, if I'm under any kind of stressful situation, when I'm asked to explain myself or speak quickly, I tend to have that same kind of stuttering that you hear from Joe. But I can tell you, I've met him in person and he is sharp as a tack. And he's very healthy. He's very health conscious, unlike his opponent who eats cheeseburgers and drinks Diet Cokes all day. So I don't have any worries at all about Joe's mental capacity and his institutional knowledge. I mean, so I have the same issue come up with in my profession where the young realtors have the bright and shiny and they know all the technology and they do all the social media, but they don't have the institutional knowledge that I have of getting transactions completed because I've been doing it for 40 years. And so it's the same with Joe. He's been in the system working across both aisles, getting things done for, as the other Donna said, 54 years. It's worth a lot to have somebody that actually knows how to get things done.
Yeah, and just like LBJ was such an effective president because he knew how Congress worked, certainly that has to be useful for Biden. Donna Kelly, did you want to add something to that, to this topic?
This will be really short, but I think the Mormon community of any community in America ought to be accepting of somebody who's an older leader, because the Mormon hierarchy doesn't even come into their power over the general church until they're, almost in their 80s. So I find it somewhat hypocritical that Mormons would want to criticize Joe Biden for his age and say he's not qualified when every one of their leaders is usually much older than Joe Biden. So just
Thank you.
2 cents.
And I have something to say.
Oh, Kim, did you want to say something?
In response to Donna's comment, I just think it's really unfair that people are equating people not being able to speak well to not being intelligent, because like Donna was saying, she has fibromyalgia and MS. Well, I have fibromyalgia and words just fly away when I'm speaking and I can never get them back. But I have a 4.0 grade point average and I'm a really good writer, and there are all these other strengths that you wouldn't see if my credibility was immediately blown off because I forget words sometimes. So that's all I have to say.
Yeah. And I stumble with my words all the time. So, Jeff, so I was going to ask if any of you have perspective on this. I was hoping to ask Jeff. I think Jeff had to step away for a second, but my mom's response is Biden has dementia. Biden has dementia. And I think that's probably got to be a talking point on Fox News or something. My reaction to that is, well, do any of you guys have a reaction to that sort of description of Joe Biden? I want to give people a chance to respond to that.
I think Joe Biden had a medical exam by a real doctor, unlike his opponent, who wrote his own medical evaluation and had a doctor sign it. So I think that if Joe Biden had dementia, his health evaluation would have shown that.
But also, isn't that a really offensive allegation to be making, or kind of a really serious and inappropriate and inoffensive allegation to make, unless there's, medical evidence for it? I just wanted to kind of, that's Roseanne. Did you want to?
It's almost like it's projection. I mean, if you watch Donald Trump sometimes or read transcripts of what he said, it doesn't even make any sense. So it's like, how can they say Joe Biden has dementia when Trump is totally incoherent sometimes? I don't understand that.
Yeah. Okay. So So that's. Oh, go ahead. Does anybody else want to comment on this topic? Yeah.
I just wanted to point out. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I think the year difference is just like 3 years. Like Trump is 74 and Biden is 77.
Mhm.
Right. Yeah, they're definitely close, just a few years apart.
Right. Just,
Yeah.
I think sometimes they talk about Joe Biden as if he was like way older than Trump, but it's just
Yeah. And you make a good point, Donna Cox. Health can affect your real age. Well, there's kind of your real age, and then there's your functional age. And depending on how healthy you live, the number of your age doesn't always reflect your level of health. And I think that's an important thing to mention. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, Jeff, I want to bring you back in. Jeff, I was just talking really quickly about the allegations that Trump has dementia and how kind of inappropriate and or offensive it is for people to make statements like that unless they have evidence. As a physician, is there anything you can or want to say about that?
I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, I don't hear anyone with any medical background making those allegations. It's clearly not dementia, first of all, and clearly you can't make that diagnosis from random press clips, which is what they're using to do that. It's not even worth the attention. And as I mentioned to the others, that's my mom's number one thing that she says is that Biden has dementia. You know what I mean? So it's not great, but it's out there, and it frustrates me. Yeah, I'm frustrated too. I guess I'd be more interested if a doctor ever said that, but you just don't hear that. I think people are also underestimating. I'm sure people were saying this, but the grind, and the grind with the presidency is nothing less, but the grind of a 24/7 campaign is really going to cause some cognitive just like word salad kind of things that are completely normal. I think I would have problems keeping that schedule and finding words that I'm looking for. I mean, it's silly, especially if I had an issue with stuttering or a history of that. It's just not even worth the attention anyone's paying.
Okay, well, I hope you're not sad that I brought it up, but I'm
sorry. It's just
I
thought the debate would put that to rest.
It's good. It's good. I appreciate that. Thanks for the medical perspective. That's super valuable. Okay. And by the way, I hope you guys aren't offended that I'm bringing up the criticisms, but I did it with Trump and I want to be fair. And so I hope you guys are okay with that. So the second thing that I actually share some concerns about are some of the dealings that we've heard about with Joe Biden's son, Hunter. And I want to be clear about that. When I heard about sort of Hunter Biden allegedly, working in the Ukraine or in foreign countries, getting these really large salaries where his experience was questionable. And, it seems as though somehow Joe Biden's kids were benefiting from their relationship with Joe Biden and making a lot more money than they should for not having enough qualifications. For me, it smells or sounds really fishy and problematic. That's just my opinion. I know that those who are critical of Joe Biden go way beyond that. And this is separate from the recent allegations that have come over just in the past couple of weeks. But taking aside for a second the laptop and the Russia-China corruption stuff, just the concerns about Hunter Biden in the Ukraine. Hunter Biden in the Ukraine. Do any of you share those concerns before I ask people to respond negatively against them? So the allegations of sort of corruption and or concern about political advantage or financial advantage. Anyone want to comment in support or share concern?
I'll comment on it as somebody who, I've always valued things being fair. And if I see things that are happening that are not fair, then I don't like that. However, my hands are tied because we can also look at Trump's family and see some of the same things that are going on in there. So yeah, that does bother me. And if I had another choice, I would be choosing somebody else. But what are you going to do?
Okay, so for you, it smells fishy, but it's kind of like both parties are guilty.
Everything's fishy here, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else share this concern before we invite people to criticize the concern? Anyone else? Okay, who wants to criticize the concern or give a response to the concern? Okay, Quentin and then Roseanne again.
Right. So I guess my number one response is that I think Hunter Biden deserves every bit of the criticism coming to him, but that's why I didn't write him in on the ballot. I voted for his dad. I think more generally, I think this kind of thing is probably more common than we realize among politicians' kids and, other family members. There was some stuff early on in the Trump administration involving Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, who has close family connections to a Chinese shipping company, and there were allegations of favoritism there. A lot of this stuff happens. A lot of it's legal. It looks bad. It smells bad. I don't like it. It's unethical. We ought to consider passing laws against it. I'm totally in favor of that. There's nothing so far proving that. I know that Joe Biden's critics are trying really hard to try and connect Hunter Biden's activities to Joe and demonstrate that he somehow influenced policy. There's no evidence of that yet. And if there was, I would take it seriously.
Okay. Excellent. Roseanne, did you want to go next?
Yes. Yeah. So it appears to me that they can't find enough dirt on Joe, so they're going after his son, who may or may not deserve it. I don't know. But I find that interesting. Also, I like that Biden has, people have asked him, well, why don't you go after Trump's children? They certainly deserve it. And he said, this isn't about our families. This is about us. And I like the fact that he won't criticize Trump's children.
I love it. Yeah, thank you. That's an important perspective. Anyone else have a perspective on Hunter Biden and all that? Okay, really quickly, in the last couple weeks, we've all been waiting for the October surprises. We saw an October surprise kind of take down Hillary Clinton, which I was personally really unhappy about, even from a nonpartisan perspective. The way the FBI did what they did right before just really super bugged me. But these allegations about the laptop and someone that a laptop store repairman didn't quite see drops off. Joe Biden's son allegedly drops off 3 laptops or whatever to a computer repair store, and the repair store repairman didn't quite see them. But then Hunter Biden left the laptops there, never retrieved them, and then somehow they end up in the hands of Rudy Giuliani. Like, I hate this entire story. I want to give people a chance to respond to it. Has anybody read enough about this to be able to respond to it?
Well, first of all, it involves the name Rudy Giuliani. Okay, that's the first reason I don't care to read anything about that, and I don't believe anything he says. But second of all, Hunter Biden is not running for president. Who cares about Hunter Biden's laptop? That's my take on it. I think there's lots of things you can criticize Joe Biden about, but whether his son had certain emails to Burisma on his laptop is not something that anyone should care about. That's my opinion.
Other perspectives. There was the guy who made the speech recently that testified about his business dealings with the Biden family. Help me out, guys. I'm not a follower of Fox News, so do you guys know what I'm talking about? Anybody? No? All right. Okay. No biters on this one. That's okay. We'll move on.
One quick thing. I don't know if people have Tucker Carlson, who I put him on the same level as I think Hannity as far as believability. But there was a headline that I read this morning that he's now saying this these documents that he allegedly sent away without copying it, that got lost in the mail. Now, he did remember to copy them, but no, he doesn't want to pile on Biden. There's just so much smelliness to this whole story. I can't believe it's getting the attention it's getting. And I will be much more interested when even conservative outlets are interested. Even Wall Street Journal is going, this is not worth our time. And my bandwidth is limited.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Another criticism of Biden and Kamala Harris is just around taxes, that they're going to raise your taxes. Now, my understanding is Biden has said he's only going to raise taxes of people making over $400,000 a year. But there's this number one perception about higher taxes. And then there's the bigger concern that they're socialists, that the Green New Deal is going to destroy, our country financially. So concerns about Biden raising taxes or bankrupting the company, and or arguments against that position.
What's interesting to me is that people keep focusing on saying that the economy is directly tied to how the stock market's doing. And yet, if you look at the demographics of Trump's base, I would venture to say that a large majority of them don't have one dime invested in the stock market because they can't afford to. So, it's the same as with taxes. If you're making less than $400,000, your taxes are not going to be affected. In fact, you'll probably come out better. If you're making over $400,000, then you should be paying more in taxes. And a big majority of those people are also beneficiaries of the Social Security and Medicare benefit. And if he keeps cutting taxes in the way that he is, those are going to be bankrupted programs. And I don't want to see a country full of old people that are out on the streets because we have no safety gap for them. So it's just mind-boggling to me that so few people truly understand how our economy works and how it affects you individually.
Right. I totally agree with that. And, I think a lot of people have used socialism as a curse word and tried to attack Joe Biden on that. But, there's not one person in this country that hasn't benefited from, taxpayer dollars. I drive down streets every day that I didn't pay for. I get lots of benefits, and so does everyone else in this country gets benefits from our tax dollars being used wisely. I think what Joe Biden is about is making sure that people pay their fair share. The fact that Jeff Bezos made $50 billion last year, whatever it was, and paid zero in taxes. I paid more taxes than Jeff Bezos, who is a multi-billionaire.
And Donald Trump.
That's just wrong.
Yeah.
And I think Joe Biden is absolutely correct in that everyone needs to pay their fair share. And that's what he's going for, is that more people that are the rich millionaires and billionaires in this country don't pay anything. And I fully support what he wants to do on that.
Other comments on taxes? Ryan?
Yeah, I think it's a fair criticism. When you look at right after Trump got elected in 2016, you saw the stock market, you saw what economists call the Trump bump, and the economy did do well. The economy, they responded to his election. I think what Donna is saying about how it's benefiting the rich, it's very true. What Republicans believe is, trickle down economics that'll benefit everyone and everyone will rise. So there's a debate there, but I think it's an issue that has legitimacy that I think we as liberals need to take seriously, and think about the economy and how we can make sure that we don't get rid of all the gains, that Wall Street isn't worried about a Democrat president. But on the other side of that, like for me personally, the reason that I'm a Democrat and a liberal over a Republican is, even if I grant that certain parts of the economy will benefit from Republican policies, to me it is more important to look out for the underprivileged, the underserved in society. It's more important to make policies that are going to help those who are less privileged rise up than to worry about how well the rich are doing. And if that means I'm taxed a little bit more, and I'm not saying Biden's plan is taxing me because it's taxing, the rich, but some Democrat policies, will tax us more. If I'm taxed a little bit more so that we have equality, so that the underprivileged in the community can rise up, I'm okay with that. I like that because that to me is a more important value than the other side, than making sure I have more money in my pocket. So that's where I stand on that.
Love it. Anybody else want to jump in on this before we move on? Roseanne.
I just don't see how you can say an economy is doing well when some people don't have health care, other people are losing their place to live because they can't pay for it, that people are being underpaid if they are working. I mean, that's like saying we're all doing fine, but if you pull back the top layer, we're not. If only the people at the very top are really benefiting right now. So I don't understand that. The economy should be how everyone is doing, not just the millionaires and billionaires and the stock market.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, if I can say one more thing, John, sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, you're not at all.
But I think that, that one of the common objections that I actually agree with on the Republican side about social welfare programs is they become bloated and inefficient. I think you can't argue against a progressive tax structure as being bloated or inefficient because there's no administrative costs. It's clear that wealth inequality and income differences have just exploded over the last 20 years. And if we want to address that, if we care about being fair, I think that progressive taxation is one of the best ways to do that. It's eliminates all the inefficiencies that conservatives complain about. So, I think we're in for higher taxes. We can't put that on the shoulders of the poor. So there's going to be we're the least progressive taxation system in the world among the developed nations. So I think it's natural that we have to go that way.
Jeff,
I'm speaking as someone who's going to suffer from this. So,
right. And Jeff, while we have you on this and while we're talking about taxes and the welfare of the poor and the disadvantaged, one of Trump's sort of key, pillars is destroying Obamacare, getting rid of the Affordable Care Act and replacing it with something of his own. And I guess Biden's position on the Affordable Care Act is to improve it. I would just love to hear your thoughts on destroying, repealing Obamacare and letting Trump create healthcare for us, a system of healthcare for us, and or Biden's, proposition to potentially amend it, and just a general medical perspective on Obamacare overall obviously in 1 minute, which is, a couple minutes, which is impossible. I'm joking, but just talk to us about healthcare for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge discussion and way more complicated than I think both sides are making it. I worked for a year in New Zealand, which I think is one of these model socialized medicine countries. So I kind of saw the good and the bad of that. It's not all good. I don't think Americans will not be completely satisfied with that. There will be a number who will be much better off. There will be some who will be worse off. And I think we need to acknowledge that. My question for Trump is, why didn't you do this 2016 to 2018? It was one of your campaign promises. You had the Senate, you had the House, nothing happened. So I don't know why we trust him to do this now when he won't have the House and may not have the Senate. I don't think my problem with Obamacare is that it's been sabotaged at every step. I don't think it's a terrible solution. I think it has its problems, but and I don't think it's a complete solution. But at every step, it's been sabotaged. And ironically, I think Quentin made the great point that this was for a short-term gain, because I think what's coming, something has to happen. I think what's coming may be much less palatable to Republicans. So I'm very much in favor of let's do some gradual fixes to Obamacare and see if we can make it work. But if you're resisting that, then Medicare for All is coming. And I don't think, and that might be, that's a whole other discussion if you're going to like that. But this is the compromise. And if you're not willing to compromise, then something's got to be done.
Right. Thanks for that perspective, Jeff. We have a criticism. Man, I'll just say that I've been monitoring these comments. I've probably banned 200 people. The comments are so outrageously offensive and trolly. Nothing like our past conversations. So and it's mostly Trump supporters who are just being outrageously awful in the comments. And I just want to say, Trump supporters, you are not doing your candidate any service by being so awful in our comments. I just had to say that because I'm just distracted and outraged by all the stupid comments that all the people have to ban. Stephanie has a criticism of us, panel. He says none of us knew Tony Bobulinski's name. Wow. And I'll just admit it. I don't watch Fox News. My mom has been texting me about Bobulinski. I did watch his little press conference, and I'll just tell you, Stephanie, why I choose to not remember Bobulinski's name and don't like talking about him. And I referenced this before. I feel like Bobulinski's press release was an October surprise. It feels like it's stuff that is hearsay, and it feels like it's the type of thing brought up at the last minute to try and take down a candidate. But if you've got issues with dealings with Joe Biden or his family, bring it up a year ago, 2 years ago, bring it up when you know it, speak out then. If there's been something illegal done, go through the legal channels, but don't come out with the press release the week before the election. Make all these, claims that are sort of personal and hearsay, and then expect us all to take them super seriously. That's why I am not paying attention to Bobulinski. Do any of you, I know the Trump people love that story, and I really think it's important. And they're saying that it's, big tech and the fake news that's all not publicizing that story. We've already addressed it. Is there anything else you guys want to say about Bobulinski, or is it just dumb?
I'll just say I've heard his name before. I'm aware he's made some allegations. I don't really know much about them other than it's associated with this laptop and deals in China. What I will say is that I would be glad to read more about it when a organization with journalistic standards reports on that. And that would include a conservative-leaning journalism organization. So find me something in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or something like that. They're conservative-leaning, but they have journalistic standards. They verify stories before they report them. I will gladly read any story about Bobulinski's allegations when it shows up there.
Okay, so that brings up a really important point that was brought up last time. One of the criticisms of let's just say non-Trump supporters of Trump supporters is, Trump calls it the mainstream media, fake news. He basically says that all the media outfits except for Fox News are corrupt, and that Twitter and Facebook and YouTube are all in on it, and they're censoring these credible and important stories, and America should be scandalized, and that all these things about China and Russia and Bobulinski should be plastered over all of the news media outlets. But because the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, USA Today, all of the media outlets are liberal shills and are untrustworthy and biased, then Trump's a victim because true Americans can't get the real information they need to make informed decisions. So who wants to take a stab at that? Because I think that's really important. One of the biggest problems right now in America is the access of reliable information and the believing of fraudulent, fake information and or non-credible, biased, or conspiratory-based information. So I hope several of you will take a stab at this, but let's start with Roseanne.
Okay, so I sometimes when things happen, try to change the channel from what I'm watching and I turn to Fox to see what they're saying. And it's like we live in different universes. They might not even be talking about rising COVID cases, or it seems like when I get on there, the things that they're talking about is Bobulinski. I knew who he was, but I don't even think he's worth mentioning. So they're talking about Hunter Biden's laptop and rioting and looting in cities like Portland, how everything's just falling apart because they're looting, and that the left is getting way liberal and they're influenced by Antifa. And that's all they want to talk about on those channels. And when something happens like Governor Whitmore getting threatened, with being kidnapped and tried by a white militia group, crickets. So I think maybe a lot of really devout Trump supporters only look at Fox, where I think people who are liberal look at a lot of different news sources and are able to take maybe more informed opinions and judgments on what they're hearing.
Quentin, you were the one who brought up credible news sources, and Donna and Jeff and others, I want to hear you guys as well. So please talk about the access of reliable information in 2020 and anything else you want to say.
Right. So I think conservative media has become something of an echo chamber. One of the things that I find particularly amusing, and you'll sometimes see late night comedians making fun of this, you'll find people at, say, Fox News telling people about something and then say, you won't hear mainstream media tell you this, and then they'll play the clip from the mainstream media organization that's covering it. This happens all the time. They live in such an echo chamber that they don't even check to see whether the mainstream media outlet is actually reporting on it. And they tend to hyper focus on these minor stories before the facts have fully been vetted. So, and there's a belief that the mainstream media would never report something that is critical of Democrats. That's not true at all. For example, we had earlier this year these allegations by Tara Reid she alleged that Joe Biden had sexually assaulted her in the 1990s. I read about that in the New York Times. It was reported very thoroughly. It was troubling to me. I was concerned about it. I read them carefully. And over time, those allegations kind of fell apart with the credibility of Tara Reid, as it kind of became clear that she had a history of kind of making up stories. And which is unfortunate, right? Like this is bad for the Me Too movement to have people coming in and make up stories. Fake allegations of sexual assault are rare, but they do happen, and they sort of make it worse for everybody else. I guess what I would say also in a context of Mormonism and on a podcast like Mormon Stories, where you talk about informed consent, that people in the church need to look at outside sources of information. They need to not only live in the echo chamber provided to them by the church. I would challenge people with conservative leaning views to consider a variety of sources, look at what other sources are saying about things, and see if they really are reporting on things. And I had one other thought, but I lost. Anyway, I'll let other people talk.
Other panelists.
Well, I'll chime in. I'll be sure.
Right.
Yeah, I think Quentin nailed it on the head when he says you got to review sources with journalistic standards, and there's plenty of websites out there that will that have analyzed different media outlets on how conservative or liberal they are, right? And if you go to some far left-leaning sources, you can be in an echo chamber there. If you go to far right-leaning sources, you can be in an echo chamber there. But when Quentin says, go to one with journalistic standards, every profession, my profession, we have standards of professionalism. Each profession has that, and journalists is no different. And I think that's where, if you want to make sure something's credible and reliable, go to those sources. Try to go into the middle as much as possible, and if you can't, go to ones that lean right, ones that lean left. But look at those that are credible, that have those journalistic standards. That's where you're going to find truth, in my opinion.
There's this question of what's a fair or you know, what are the publications that are not biased, that are not controlled by the left or the right, that do a really good job of trying to provide fair and balanced news? Any of you guys want to nominate your favorites in that regard? Jeff.
I'll say a couple. I think Wall Street Journal, if you want a conservative publication, like slightly conservative leaning, that has good journalistic integrity and accountability, if anything, just that they're accountable for what they say. That's part of what's lacking with Breitbart and some of these conservative voices. So I think Wall Street Journal gives a good one. New York Times, of course, is leftist. I think most journalistic sources are going to be somewhat leftist because it's the nature of the institution. It's a check on the powers that be in government. It's what the press is there for. So of course it's going to have some leftward bias. But to say that it's consistent, you know, they're just suppressing other voices, I think is silly, and it kind of reveals a lack of other perspectives from the conservative side.
Yeah, because I watch Meet the Press. I watch This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I watch PBS. I listen to NPR. I even read the New York Times. And those journalists do a really good job of interviewing people from both sides. They have supporters of Biden, supporters of Trump. I don't like the idea of broad brushing all of the mainstream media as being biased and unfair. That's just my opinion. Go ahead, Jeff.
Really? I'm sorry, but the deeper question then is, if you don't trust any mainstream media, you're just choosing. I mean, you're choosing your authority. It's not like you've looked at Hunter Biden's email specifically by yourself. You have to trust in some authority, and so you're just choosing a different authority that has no accountability, has no ethical standards, you know, established ethical standards that we've accepted for 200 years. So I mean, whatever your authority is, you're choosing something. Why is yours more believable than the Wall Street Journal or New York Times?
We have a couple people recommending their own sources. We have several people recommending NPR. Thanks, Kelly, for that recommendation. Shimanchu 2006 also. Summer represents the Epic Times. I don't think I can recommend the Epic Times. The AP Newswire is, something that someone's recommending. Shimanchu 2006 is also saying The Economist. Sherry writes The Atlantic. So there's lots of people recommending, some more fair and balanced, reasonable.
Al Jazeera and BBC are two non-US sources that are actually pretty balanced, and I think they're really interesting to look at.
Yeah.
And to add to the news discussion, it's like you can learn how to look at data, where to find it, and how data was collected, and you can come to your own conclusions about it on your own as well. So you can look at news, but you can also do the digging yourself and find out what's true, what's not, and how they might be twisting things.
I love it. OJ says that, let's see. Laura says NPR is the most bipartisan news source. That's Laura's opinion. And then OJ says that The Hill can be pretty balanced. I think The Hill is a news outlet, out of Washington, D.C. that focuses on coverage of Congress and of Washington politics. All right. And then Sherry says, echoing what Jeff said, BBC, if you get out of the USA, is a good source. And I agree. Al Jazeera does some amazing work, Jeff. That's a great recommendation as well. Okay, we've got a few more things to cover. Fracking. So we talked about this in the last episode. There was that last debate where Biden was asked about fracking, and he basically said, what I heard, what I understood is that he wants to move us away from fracking, because he thinks there's a real imperative within the country to move towards more clean energy, natural, cleaner energy. So of course I saw Trump the next day, doing his stump speeches where he's basically saying that Trump wants to end fracking yesterday, that he wants to destroy the oil and gas industry. It didn't seem fair, but I think probably most people on this panel are for clean energy. So thoughts on fracking, thoughts on the oil and gas industry, on clean energy, anything anyone wants to share?
Well, I really like Joe Biden saying that he doesn't agree with the Green New Deal, but he likes the Biden Green Deal. So he has his own plan for that. And one of the things that I think is really important is that's not talked about enough is it could create millions of new jobs for Americans. If we decided that we were going to be the world leader in clean energy, then and set the standard for the rest of the world, we could create millions of new jobs in this country and sort of be a leader in a very positive thing that could happen in our stewardship of the earth. So I like Biden reminding people that, hey, if you want to talk about creating new jobs in the United States of America, we need to be the leader in the world on clean energy and not, try to do things like saying coal is still alive, coal is clean. It's, that's not happening.
Right. Other thoughts on this topic?
Sure.
Quentin.
I'll go. Yeah. So I think fracking is kind of with us to stay as long as we're still using oil. At least that's my take. I live in West Texas. It happens all near where I live. It's become clear that it does need to be done with adult supervision. We have cases of fracking causing earthquakes, causing pollution of groundwater. So there needs to be regulation to make sure that those things aren't happening and causing problems. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It has greatly increased America's reserves of both oil and gas. We've shifted our electrical power away from coal toward gas, and that's, at least in the short term, that's a net win for reduction of greenhouse gases because you can produce more electricity for the same amount of emissions with gas than you can with coal. It's a cleaner technology. We still need to move away from it. I guess my take would be that we should not ban fracking. We should make sure that it's carefully regulated and that we should be finding ways to encourage development of other energy resources. In general, I favor the notion of a carbon tax because I still believe in markets and using markets to determine the best allocation of resources. A carbon tax basically puts a price on carbon and allows the market to decide how best to spend what carbon things are worth it, and that puts cleaner fuels more competitive with carbon-based fuels without necessarily having to subsidize them.
Beautiful. Other comments on this topic? Roseanne.
So there's this movement that's kind of getting to be worldwide where you vote as if you were voting as your great-great-great-grandchild, which I really love that, because why would we not want to leave this world intact for our great-great-grandchildren? They leave some natural resources for them to have plants and trees and clean air. So the more I love the idea that Joe is trying to move toward sustainable energy that is from wind and sun, but is just renewable rather than just pillaging the earth more and more and more. Maybe fracking has to stay for a while, but I think we need to get away from all of those things as soon as we can and get to renewable, sustainable energy.
The only thing that stressed me out about that comment, and by the way, if we all drive, automobiles that rely on gasoline, or we use oil or whatever products, airplanes, whatever, if we're all consumers of oil and gas, then we're hypocrites if we, are just summarily dismissing the sources of it. So I've been probably more critical of fracking in the past than I should be. And we actually had one of our panelists last episode on the Trump episode. He's worked in the fracking industry, and he said, for his perspective, it's one of the more clean ways to extract fossil fuels from the earth. But anyway, what bothered me, what worried me, was that Biden could potentially lose Pennsylvania because of the way he talked about fracking. And for me, I know that Pennsylvania might be one of the key states. So I don't want him to lie, but I also didn't feel like he handled that question as well as I would have liked him to politically. Did any of you guys feel that way?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Can I say one
Ryan,
thing?
yeah, Ryan.
Since this is Mormon Stories Podcast, I'll add a little and I heard someone in the morning panel talk about this as well, about how as a member of the church. Sorry. I thought I heard something. As a member of the church, I didn't worry about environmental issues because Christ was going to come and he was going to save us all. And so as I've left the church and had to deal with, okay, Christ's second coming isn't imminent, in my opinion. I've now got to leave a planet to my kids and my descendants that's better than I came into it. That I've really felt the need to speed up these environmental issues, and so I'm grateful for what Biden's willing to do, but I would love to see it be even more accelerated, and getting as much clean energy as possible, as fast as possible, while taking into account the economy and making sure we have jobs that can replace those that would be lost. So.
Thank you. Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in about abortion, about women's reproductive rights, about the right to choose. I actually didn't bring this up at all during the Trump conversation, although it's really relevant. But I think who is in favor, in theory, of abortion? But I think we should have a really quick and educated, thoughtful discussion on women's reproductive rights and the right to choose. And let's have the women jump in on this first, if that's okay. So does anybody, for those of the panelists who are asking, what are your views on abortion? And if you want to tie it to Biden, please do. Who wants to start on that one? Donna, Kelly.
I can start on that one because first of all, I think it's a mistake to say anybody is pro-abortion. I don't think anybody on this planet has ever been pro-abortion. No woman wakes up in the morning and says, "Oh, goody, I get to have an abortion today." It's a choice that a woman has to make that's very complicated, and it's never something that anybody wants to do. But I think, to me, the key is there are two ways to try to reduce abortion rates. And I think everyone's in favor of that. Trying to reduce abortion rates is a good thing. There are some people that believe we should dictate what a woman should be allowed to do with her body. And I use dictate very purposely because that's leaning towards a dictatorship approach. For all of those people that say the government is too big and interferes with our private lives too much, that this is one of the most extreme invasions. So there are people that want to dictate whether or not a woman should be allowed to have an abortion. On the other hand, you have people like Joe Biden who say that they would like to reduce abortion rates by providing education and contraceptive care that's available. If you look at the CDC website, every time Democrats are in power, the abortion rates decline significantly. With the Obama administration, it was a 26% declination. With Bill Clinton's administration, it was a 30% decline in abortion rates. That is because Democrats believe in providing education and contraceptive care that's available to everybody. And so that is the way that we can reduce abortion rates in this country. When Republicans are in power, the abortion rates stay the same. And so the way that we need to approach this is we need to give education and contraceptive care to women and let them and their doctors make that choice.
Beautiful. Who else wants to speak? Kim.
I'll just echo everything that Donna said, and add that why are we only talking about regulating women's bodies? Why are we not talking about regulating men's bodies? Because I can orgasm and not have a baby, but men can orgasm and see. So why are we focusing on women? Why are we not focusing on men? That's just my 2 cents.
Very important. Very important. Roseanne, yes.
I agree with what both of them said. I don't know any woman that is pro-abortion, but women need to have autonomy over their own bodies. This is maybe something that men don't get because there's nothing parallel in their lives. But when a woman is pregnant, it could change the trajectory of her whole life. What she can do with her life, what she earns, how she is, what kind of mother she is to her other children. So I don't think women per se are pro-abortion. They are pro-women having choices. And also I find it ironic that the right are very, very pro-life, but it appears to me that so much of that pro-life disappears after the woman has given birth. We don't want to pay for child care for working mothers. We don't want to pay for universal preschool. We don't want to pay for like WIC and other services for women with small children. We don't want to help these kids with school lunches or help them pay for college. So I don't get how you can be pro-life and not want to help that life all along the way. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Excellent. Any of the gentlemen on the call? Oh, Donna Kelly. Oh, Donna, you're muted. Just 1 second. Let me unmute you. I got you. Wait. Do it one more time. Okay, perfect.
We could pass a law that says every male, once they turn of age to be able to reproduce, should have a vasectomy, every male. And then that would eliminate abortions. And they could only get their vasectomy reversed if they pass a test and they prove that they're going to be a good, responsible father. We could do that. But you know what? That interferes with men's use and rights to their own body. That's exactly what the people who claim to be pro-life are saying. We get to regulate women's bodies. Why don't we regulate men's bodies so they can't cause pregnancy and therefore there will be no abortions?
Can I say one more thing? Sorry. Just, I know that there has been talk among the Republicans about late-term abortion and how Democrats are for that, which is kind of puzzling to me because late-term abortion is not legal anywhere unless there's a really compelling reason. And Pete Buttigieg, I think he was talking on Fox, said something really compelling. He said late-term abortions happen to people who have, because they have no other option because of something severe going on. They've already made a nursery. They've already picked baby names. So I think that there's misinformation, disinformation there about late-term abortion, where they're saying, the Democrats are going to kill your baby until the day before it's born. That's crazy. That's not abortion. So I hate the disinformation there also.
Jeff.
Yeah, I want to echo on Roseanne's point because I think that's the biggest problem in this discussion. I work with a lot of women and I am the unfortunate bearer of news of unwanted pregnancies quite frequently. And I am a little uncomfortable, I'll admit, to how many, and I won't say if it ever happens, it feels a little uncomfortable. So I sympathize with when women say, well, can you tell me who can take care of this? And the idea of getting them to someone who can abort the pregnancy. I get the objection or the kind of the feeling that goes with an abortion of convenience. Now, I'm not ready to tell them they can't. I think that's not appropriate for a government to act for the same reason that I have some libertarian tendencies towards gun control. And I just think it's not a proper decision. But this late-term abortion discussion, I think, is reprehensible. I've been through a lot of trauma. I have a lot of traumatic memories in my career as 18 years in the ER. There are cases that stick with you. There is still one that haunts me every day of a woman who delivered a stillborn baby. It's the most traumatic experience as a physician that I can remember in my 18 years of emergency medicine. I cannot imagine what she went through. for the government to step in and say, you will deliver this baby because some group of white guys somewhere said you had to, is just unbelievably, it's unconscionable. And and for the Republicans to jump on this emotional situation, these women, just like Roseanne said, and Pete Buttigieg said as well, these aren't abortions of convenience. Never. No woman says, I'm going to get pregnant and I think I'll carry it for 8 months and then have an abortion because I don't really feel like having the baby anymore. That just doesn't ever happen. There's always issues involved. And the issues are so complicated that we don't need an outside force coming in and telling the doctor and the patient what to do with that. It just complicates it. And for Republicans to jump on this emotionally charged situation, because of course no one wants to kill a baby, and that's their example that they're going to use for political purposes, to trample all over these women who are going through an awful experience for political points, I think is reprehensible. If you want to talk about abortions of convenience, that's a different discussion, but late-term abortions, stay the hell away.
So there are commenters who are saying no one's talking about the right of the child. No one's talking about this innocent life that's being taken. What are your guys' response to that sort of question about what about the baby?
Well, this is a Mormon community that we're talking to here. The Mormon Church doctrine is it is not murder, and that abortions are acceptable to have in certain situations. They say the Mormon doctrine is abortions are acceptable to have if the mother's life is or health is in danger, if there's rape, or if there's incest. So it is not murder according to the Mormon Church. It's just that people who are pro-choice want to be able to allow women to say when they feel it's acceptable or necessary to have an abortion as well. Not just the Mormon Church define, or other white male leaders in this country decide when it's acceptable. We want the woman to be able to decide with her doctor. I had a friend who she was 5 months pregnant, and it was determined that the fetus's brain was growing outside of her body. And outside of the fetus, the brain was growing separately. There was a 0% chance that she would have a healthy live baby if she carried the baby to term. And those are the kind of situations where we're having those late term abortions. And she was devastated by the whole thing. She had waited for years to be able to have a baby. Those are the kinds of things that we need to let the woman and her doctor decide, and not other people who just want to exercise power and dictate what she should do.
Can I chime in here a minute?
Donna Cox.
So I mentioned before that I've adopted 4 special needs children, and I love my children and I'm thankful for them, and I wouldn't not want them to be here. But let me just tell you that a lot of these kids who are being born are coming with a whole multitude of special needs that our government, our systems are not prepared to handle. With the increase of opioid addictions, all the mental health problems that are not being addressed, I can just tell you that my kids, for one, have cost the taxpayers multi millions of dollars with all of their special needs. And if you want to talk about bankrupting our system, if you keep forcing people to have children who are not prepared to take care of their health while they're pregnant, who are drug addicted, who are homeless, there are not enough people like my husband and I stepping up and taking these kids. And, I don't know where they expect all these kids to go, but it is a broken system, and having more babies is not the answer.
And what do we do? And I'll just ask this again, forgive me, for somebody says, but what about the life of the child? What about the rights of the child?
So I'd say, yeah, what about the life of the child? I've got a child whose parents were, so their birth parents, I have a set of twins that we adopted in Hawaii. Their parents had 10 children between the two of them. Every single one of those kids were impaired because the parents were drug addicted and mentally ill. And so my child is blind. He has cerebral palsy. He has autism. He has a seizure disorder. He only has a third of his intestines. And so I say, yeah, what about the right of the child? He was brought into this world under horrible circumstances. So if his mom had had access to mental health care and birth control, then, you know, he would not be in a situation where he's got a lifetime of health problems.
Yeah, and just to add to what Donna is saying right now, you know what? My son, James, my youngest, he has level 3 autism spectrum disorder. And our conservative senator, Ted Cruz, has enacted things during his run as senator that has taken money from children's Medicaid.
Yeah.
And this has affected children who need the therapies at their home. So you have that, and I'm sorry, I don't believe that. And Governor Abbott, I just had to talk to the Texas Behavioral Health Executive Commission because Governor Abbott removed disabled people from a list of that social workers can't discriminate against. So I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time believing that the right really cares about the child once it is born from the actions that they have given. And children are the poorest age group in America. 1 in 6 children live in poverty. So yeah, what about the child?
Okay. We're certainly not going to resolve the abortion debate here, but we definitely got some thoughtful perspectives. And so thank you for all that. And thanks to all the listeners. Was somebody else wanting to jump in?
Me.
Gerardo.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention, Donna, I think, mentioned 2 or 3 of the cases in which the LDS Church allows the consideration of abortion. There's actually 3, and she mentioned 2 of them, which is one is rape or incest, which is they put them on the same bullet point. The second one is when a competent physician determines that the life of or health of the mother is in serious jeopardy. And the third, if a physician determines that the fetus has severe defects that will not allow the baby to survive beyond birth. So there's actually 3, which and one of them is the fetus has severe defects, which is one. I think that one last point, like I haven't heard a lot of people talk about that one, but yeah, I wanted to mention that. And I also wanted to mention just, I don't know, Trump supporters care a lot about children and the lives of of children, but more than 5,000 children were raped from their parents by Trump border policies, and at least 7 children have died in U.S. custody, and at least 362 are now accounted for, and 545 of them have been effectively orphaned because they can't find their parents. So, and these children are in cages. So I don't understand. I think there's kind of like a little bit of hypocrisy there on.
That's pro-birth, not pro-life.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thanks, Gerardo. That's a great perspective. Anything before we wrap up this particular issue and go on to one or 2 more?
Sure, I'll just add a couple of things.
Quentin, please.
Number one, I'll say that I agree that abortion is a morally complicated question, and that's why the law treats early term and late term abortions differently. I struggled with this. I struggled with it the first time I voted for a Democrat. But the one thing that I would point out, and some people in the audience may be familiar with these, the retired American Heritage professor at BYU, Frank Fox, has got these videos going around in which he's explaining why he's voting for Biden. And one of the points that he makes is that this election is going to have less bearing on the abortion issue than any election in a long time. With 1/3 of the court appointed in the last term, it's unlikely that the court is really going to change substantially in the next presidential term. So I guess if there were ever occasion for pro-life voters to consider what their views are on other issues, this election is it.
Thanks, Quentin. Okay, I wouldn't have journalistic integrity if I didn't bring this up. Of course, Donald Trump has a long known history of, allegations of sexual predation, of assaulting or mistreating women or speaking in really vile terms about women. I think that's not really in question, but Joseph Biden also has allegations regarding, sometimes, people say creepy behavior. Sometimes people say inappropriate behavior. There may even, I think there's at least one claim of some sort of sexual abuse or assault. Who wants to speak about why, a lot of people say they're both inappropriate with women. Who wants to speak to that charge? Donna Cox wants to start on that one.
So I think a really good indication of the soul of a man is who he's married to. And if you look at Jill Biden and you look at her credentials and you look at who she is as a human being, if you think for a minute that a woman of her character would be married to somebody who was a sleazebag, I'm sorry, I just don't buy it.
Well, and I don't know Melania at all, but is that her name, Trump's wife?
Yeah.
Melania? I mean, I don't know her well enough to say she's not a good person too. So I want to be careful about that. What's that?
A previous porn star.
Well,
so
I want to try and keep this as respectable as possible, just in terms of like being respectful. But also, Donna Kelly, a lot of women stay with abusive husbands. So that logic that a woman isn't going to stay with the sleazebag, that's not super true, right? And Donna, let's unmute you because we want to hear what you have to say.
The issue of domestic violence is very, very complicated and would take several hours to kind of analyze and discuss. But let me just say this about Joe Biden. I think that he did some inappropriate invading of space kind of things with people, not just women, but boys and men as well. He rubbed their shoulders when they didn't ask him to. He went over to a woman and smelled her hair. We're talking about things that happened like 20 years ago, but they were kind of creepy and invading their space kind of thing. But Joe has learned and he has progressed. And that's one thing that I will say about Joe is that he recognizes his own. He's very self-aware of his own imperfections, and he has changed that. He doesn't do that stuff anymore. He shouldn't have been rubbing shoulders of somebody that didn't ask for that. I mean, but to say that that's the same as 22 women credibly accusing you of sexual assault is really, really outrageous. Rubbing someone's shoulders is not the same as sexual assault. I have read all of the accounts that I'm aware of the women who say that they were sexually assaulted by Donald Trump. And I got to tell you that I believe they are credible statements. I personally know of someone who was in a beauty pageant when she was younger. That was a Donald Trump beauty pageant. And she was told, one of Trump's assistants came to her and told her that Donald Trump would like to speak with you in his motel room at 9:30 tonight. And he told her what to wear, and he told her to come without panties on. And she was supposed to come to his hotel room. She did not go. She did not comply with that. And the next morning she was eliminated from the competition. So I believe there are a lot more stories out there like this because of the 24 that I have read. Some of them are very egregious. One of them, a woman was thrown against a conference room after everyone had left, and he held his forearm across her throat, put his hand up her dress and inside her vagina. So those are the kind of things that Donald Trump has been credibly accused of doing. That is a universe away from what Joe Biden, did in the past in invading people's personal space and that sort of thing, which he has now said that was not good. I shouldn't have been doing that, and does not do anymore. So I think that we denigrate the accounts of sexual assault victims when we say that rubbing someone's shoulders is the same as sexual assault. It's not. And again, I just think you have to look at what happened and say that was inappropriate. He shouldn't have done that. And he's changed his behavior and doesn't do that anymore.
And I want to add, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Just one sec. So, thank you, Donna. That was great. There's a comment by Laren. When was Joe Biden ever pictured with Jeffrey Epstein? That's also, Jeffrey Epstein is super disturbing. And yeah, Trump was associated with him. I don't know of Biden ever being. Really quick, Donna, before I jump to you, Kim, but wasn't there one woman who made allegations of assault against Joe Biden?
Yeah, Tara Reid. I have read as much as I can read about that. And I wrote the Start by Believing proclamation for the state of Utah. I am a big believer in believing women when they come forward. And we need to start by believing. We need to say, you know what? 92 to 98% of the time, women are telling the truth about this. But there are those rare statements of women where they are false. I think they're somewhere between 2 and 5%. That's what the research shows. I have read as much as I can about hers. And first of all, I don't know 100% that something didn't happen, but I can tell you that all of the red flags for a false report are there. She changed her story on significant key details numerous times. She's told numerous versions of what happened. She said that she had to leave the working for Biden because he had done this, but to other people, and in a social media post, which she later deleted, she said she left the Biden, working for Biden because he didn't respect Vladimir Putin, and all American women are sexually aroused by Vladimir Putin. I mean, she has said things that just make her count not believable at all. And so I don't really know 100% whether that happened or not, but I can tell you this, the state of our country right now, I mean, we're approaching 250,000 dead Americans because of COVID. The racial tensions are at an all-time high. There's great unrest in our country. We have other things that we need to worry about more than whether Joe Biden did something like this 30 years ago by a statement that's not very credible.
Thank you. Thank you, Donna. Kelly. Kim, what did you want to add?
I just wanted to add that I am really grateful that people are pointing out Biden's actions as being creepy, because moving forward, we can stop men touching women in that way without our consent. So if the conservative men especially are going to point that out, then I hope moving forward that they will act in a way that is different from Joe Biden.
Beautiful. Others want to comment on this particular topic before we move on to another one?
I just have one rhetorical question. What kind of man says he would love to have sex with his daughter if she wasn't his daughter?
Okay. All right. Here's the last comment or question I'll ask for the panel before we actually ask for kind of some closing statements. One of the reasons my mom does not want Biden to be president is because she's terrified that Kamala could become president. And so there's a lot of people who think Kamala represents extreme, socialism, the Green New Deal, that all sorts of terrible things about Kamala, that she's an extremist. What anybody want to share their perspectives about Kamala? Do they agree or do they disagree?
I can start.
Brian.
If you're afraid that she's more left than Biden, then yeah, I guess I agree. But I'm also more left than Biden. So I I support her. I liked her when they were during the primaries. I think she has some fabulous ideas. And so, but I get the concern from conservatives because I think she is more left. But for me, I like that. So.
Okay. That's Ryan's perspective. Other perspectives on Kamala.
I watched Kamala in a 60 Minutes, I think it was 60 Minutes, I don't remember, but it was an interview and she was talking about, the interviewer was asking her about the questions that you're bringing up, that she's all more progressive and everything. Why is she like that? And she was like, because as a woman and as somebody of color, I'm pulling upon my own personal experiences. And I think it's really important that we, when it comes to things like socialism or socialist ideologies, that's usually coming from people who have experienced going through this. And if we can combine people with this lived experience with others and come to an agreement, then that's going to help our country. And I think that's what she is doing as being Biden's vice president. So.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kim. Other perspectives on Kamala? Roseanne.
Living in the Bay Area, I've watched her for years since she was in San Francisco, and I thought, wow, that is a smart woman, and she's a go-getter, and she's got enthusiasm. And I've also watched people say, oh, well, she got there by sleeping with people, specifically Willie Brown. She had a relationship with him, but it was way before she ran for public office. So I hate that women are held to a different standard, and then you can kind of just make it so maybe it's sort of true, but not. But she is just a go-getter. She's smart. She's enthusiastic. I think she has the best interest of people in mind. I think we'd be really lucky if she ended up our president someday. I do.
Thank you, Roseanne. Other comments on Kamala?
I'll just offer a quick one about, all of this talk about socialism and such. I think Kamala is probably somewhat to the left of Joe Biden in her politics. I really wouldn't label her a socialist. Every time I hear the label socialist applied to Democrats in the United States, I get the impression that Democrats and Republicans are working from completely different definitions of the word. And I find it no longer productive to even really talk about socialism. If somebody's concerned about socialism, let's talk about specific policies. So I challenge people to say, what socialist policy that you think she supports do you have a problem with? Because these labels are ultimately just kind of another form of name calling.
Yeah, and we're having comments from people that are being super rude and mean and nasty, calling lots of names. I do think some of the opposition to Kamala is racism, is veiled racism. And I just want to state myself, I think this country desperately needs a female president or several women presidents. We have had only top male leadership for way too long. And what positive things could come for this country to have women leading us at the highest levels. So that's my own editorial opinion, but I feel really strongly about that.
It's too late for me because I already turned in my ballot, but I would write you in, John.
I would write you in, Donna Kelly. And several people have said they want the Donnas as vice president and president of the United States.
Hey, that sounds like a good idea to me.
Donnas forever.
Donnas for president. We can just have one name, Donnas. Donnas 2020. I like it. Other perspectives about Kamala before we close. Okay, well, we want to give you guys equal time. We've got about 15 minutes left before we match the time we gave the Trumpies. So the way I want to close out really quickly, I asked them, what are the things you fear most about Biden and Harris? And so I'm going to ask you guys all the same thing before we have a closing round of predictions and final words. So what do you guys fear most about a Trump-Pence second term? And we'll start with Roseanne. What do you fear most about a Trump-Pence second term?
Well, I fear that maybe they will be able to get rid of some of the protections we have, the Affordable Care Act, the marriage for LGBTQ people, Roe v. Wade. Those things really scare me. But also the fact that there's such a big division in the country, and it's just getting bigger and bigger. And I think that it will just keep growing if Trump is there again. He even says for himself, I'm the president of the people that like me. Everybody else, I don't care about you. Like California with all of our wildfires, for a long time he was like, I'm not going to give you any money to help with these wildfires because you don't like me. I mean, he's divisive, and I think it will get worse.
Okay. Thank you, Roseanne. Let's get Jeff back in here. We got Jeff in the house. We lost Jeff for a little bit because Jeff's doing double duty here. Jeff, the question is, what do you fear most about a Trump-Pence second term? Sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. Let me unmute you as well before you start. Oh, you have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself before you start. Okay, go ahead.
That is a little putting me on the spot. I fear the division. I think that's just ripping us apart. I fear the lack of a conservative voice that is credible, that's intelligent. I think the discourse in our country over the last 4 years has degraded considerably. We can't talk to each other. We can't and I do feel like it's one-sided. I'm sorry, I've been on both sides, and I feel like there's one unique side here that's really responsible for a lot of the us versus them rhetoric. So I feel continued division in the country. I want to solve problems, and we're just not in a place where we're solving problems. There were people that I liked better in the Democratic ticket in terms of their solutions. But at the same time, I feel like the division, we can't get anywhere until we start talking back and forth between us and respecting the other side. So the biggest fear of a Trump presidency is really the continued degradation of the Republican Party and the conservative voice. There's just not a credible conservative position at this point.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Donna Cox.
I fear we're going to lose our democracy. I think that, Trump thinks he's a king. He doesn't have nothing about what he's doing is conservative as far as conserving our economy, conserving our planet, conserving our civility towards one another. When I see people show up at polling sites armed, non-military people that think that they've been personally chosen by Trump to represent me, I fear that we're going to have an all-out civil war if we don't get reasoning back in office.
I love it. Thank you, Donna. Gerardo, unmute yourself and share with us your biggest fears with the Trump-Pence second term.
Yeah, so I was at BYU, Idaho when Trump got elected in 2016. And I just couldn't believe the comments that students, white students, which is the majority of BYU, Idaho, were making about immigrants, about Mexicans, about Latin Americans. Once Trump won, just such racist comments that I just started listening at work, just during class, even roommates. It was just crazy, and I couldn't believe it. It was because I hadn't seen it. I hadn't seen it before, even while Trump was just running for president. And it was until after he was elected when I just felt this gave a license to a lot of these white Mormon students to start talking about these subjects in a very racist ways in my point of view. And I've seen that played out in many aspects as well, not just at BYU Idaho, even just after BYU Idaho. And another thing that really worries me is the LGBTQ issues, and how not necessarily Trump, and this is something that I think a lot of Trump supporters play to. They say Trump is super pro LGBT, because I don't necessarily think it's Trump, but it's his party and his administration who have really fought against LGBTQ issues during this past three and a half years. They passed policies, fought with the Supreme Court to in their mind improve the religious freedoms, but also taking back LGBTQ rights. And this November 4th, the hearing that the Supreme Court is going to have has me worried. And just like others had said, even same-sex marriage is still part of the one of the things that the Republican Party is against in their anyway. And immigration too, like as an immigrant, it has been a nightmare for us, for my husband and I, to try to get it done correct. We've done the whole process right and correct, but it's just, especially when the pandemic hit and Trump started hitting on immigration and putting a lot of policies to, it was just a lot of nights I just couldn't sleep because we didn't know what Trump was going to tweet or what he was going to come up with like the next day for to slow down our immigration process. So yeah, those are the things that I fear the most.
Thank you, Gerardo. I'm so grateful for your perspective here, and so glad you've been with us. Kim, are you next? Go ahead and unmute yourself. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so one thing that scares me about Trump as a mother of a special needs child is when he mocked a physically disabled journalist. As a mother of a disabled child, I know what his mother went through whenever she saw her son be mocked by a president at a rally in front of everybody while he stands at a podium. You know, when you're a special needs mom, like you rock your son at night and then you know that at some point in your child's life, he's going to meet somebody who does that to him. And it hurt in a way that I can't describe, to watch the leader of our country treat somebody like that. And I fear that since he is the leader, that people are going to think it's okay to treat people who are different physically like that. And then you have the people who are different mentally. People who disagree with Trump are now called radicals. And we want to and he just slurs all of these lies about us. And I mean, people follow him. Why would anybody listen to me when the person who they idolize is saying all these negative things about people? Like, we can't have that. That's not healthy for our country. That is not going to bring peace in any sense of the word if we cannot work together. And so I really fear for my friends who are both conservative and Democrats, because it feels like we're not going to be friends anymore. We're not going to be able to be friends anymore because of how polarizing everything has been. And I don't think that is the direction that our country can go down and survive.
Thank you, Kim. A lot of conservatives and Republicans respond saying Obama was super divisive. And I just want to say he may have been divisive because it's controversial in the United States for a person of color to be president. But to compare the divisiveness of the president, I don't think they're in the same universe. So I object to that. But Kim, thank you for that heartfelt plea for respectful speech and treatment of special needs humans in our society, and from the perspective of a mother's special needs. That was beautiful. Donna Kelly, have you expressed yet? Okay, let's unmute you and hear your biggest fears.
My biggest fear about a second Trump administration is that he will become even more unhinged than he has already been. I mean, when he said that neo-Nazis were very fine people, I think that unleashed a lot of hate and dangerous things in our country. And I think it will be even more so in his second administration, because he doesn't have to pretend to be presidential. He doesn't have to pretend to be, anything anymore. He's not going to get reelected anyway. So he will be even more unhinged than he is now. And things will, like that woman that screamed at the Republican convention, the best is yet to come. I am afraid of that. I'm afraid that he will be even more extreme. And for the first time in my life, I am afraid for my country. I have, for the first time in my life, in the last few weeks, I've started to look at how to move to a foreign country when you retire. Because I don't want to be a part of a country that, keeps kids in cages on the border and supports neo-Nazis and perpetrates hate and division. And so please go out there and vote for Joe Biden. Thank you, John.
So beautiful, Donna. And we're not quite done, but that was beautiful. We are getting some comments in. Some people say that comment he made about fine people on both sides was taken out of context, and that he actually in that speech basically excluded the extremists. I'm not educated enough to know for sure, but I just want to put that as an asterisk because I tried to do fact checking, and I'm not saying you said something wrong, Donna. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, he also recently told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by.
Yeah, that was a problem.
When he was asked to denounce white supremacy. So I don't believe for a second that he would do anything to bring people together on racial issues.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't tell white supremacists to stand back and stand by. That's just wrong.
Yeah, that was problematic for sure. I mentioned that in the last episode. Also, just as a kind of to try and do fact checking, I've had a lot of people write in that these cages were actually used in the Obama administration. That is something that bled over. Is there truth to that, Donna?
He did put the cages in, but he was not doing it to separate families. And he wasn't leaving people in for an indeterminate amount of time. It was a temporary holding space that had, I think, there was a timeline for how long they would be kept there. So it's been totally bastardized, for lack of a better word, of what the intent was. It was temporary holding quarters until they could process people because they had so many coming from Central America coming up. And they didn't have any place to put them safely. But they were not separating parents from their children when they did that.
Okay. Gerardo, I want to make sure and get you in on this.
Yeah. From what I understand of everything I've read, the cages existed, but the Trump administration is the author of the family separation program. And from what I understand, the purpose behind it was to scare immigrants from trying to cross the border illegally if they could take away their children, and then the voice like people would hear about this, like then immigrants wouldn't come here. But it still didn't stop a lot of immigrants on coming here during the caravans, and that's where a lot of these children come from, and a lot of them, over 500 of them, they can't find their parents. But yeah, it's totally a Trump administration's brainchild.
Okay. Ryan, I think, is there anyone who I haven't had speak besides Ryan? Quentin. Yes, of course, Quentin. Okay, let's do Ryan, then Quentin. Ryan.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty similar theme here with all of us. The thing that scares me the most is just the continued lack of human decency from the top. I hear a lot of arguments when I bring that issue up, or someone else brings that issue up. Oh, well, the left is doing it too. And I agree there's lack of decency on both sides, but I don't think we've ever seen that from the top, from the president of the United States. And what I see from Biden is rhetoric, language that is inclusive, that is accepting. And that's what scares me the most, is from having another 4 years of a president who lacks that decency and that trickling down into our everyday lives. I've seen more people be willing to express hateful views over these past 4 years than ever before, because they're hearing that from the top. And that's what worries me the most. I'm a bleeding heart liberal. The issues, I support all the liberal issues. When it comes to the character, I think that's what is the most scary about so many people, and why so many even Republicans and conservatives, friends that I have, are jumping and voting for Biden because of this lack of being presidential, of human decency. And that's what scares me the most if Trump and Pence were to win again.
Excellent. Thank you, Ryan. All right, Quentin, bring us home, Quentin, on this question.
Yeah, sure. I would echo, of course, all the other stuff, kind of how it influences our culture. I'm very concerned about that. But in terms of just my desire for good government, accountable government, I'm really concerned about what a second Trump administration would do for that. I feel like if you look at who he put in his cabinet, he started his administration with a lot of fairly mainstream establishment Republicans in his cabinet. And slowly over time, he's basically fired them all. Anyone who ever dared contradict or question him, question the things he was doing, he's sort of taken off all of the guardrails. All of the checks against his worst impulses have essentially been removed in the last year or two. And a second term would basically expand that further. There's speculation that if he were reelected, he doesn't like the people running the FBI and other entities, and he's basically going to be cleaning house and putting personal loyalists. And this is basically going to entrench the corruption that we've already seen. And, a lot of people who research these kind of things will say that, once corruption becomes normalized in government, it becomes very difficult to get rid of. So if we just want to live with good, effective government, regardless of your party, that's one of my greatest fears of a second Trump term.
Excellent. Thank you, Quentin. This is an amazing panel. I'm really grateful for this panel. I'm going to go ahead and weigh in just because I'm the moderator and I have the rights to do so. I didn't weigh in last time and express my concerns about Biden, so I'll do that just to be balanced. My only concerns about Biden, I don't think he's a little bit too gaffe prone for my taste, and I really want a woman. I think it was time 100 years ago to have a woman president, 150 years ago, but it's certainly time now. And I really wanted a woman president last time, and I'm really frustrated we don't have a woman president this time. That's my biggest concern with Joe Biden, and that's not his fault, but I'm just being honest. That's my biggest concern. My biggest concern with Trump is, and I'm surprised this hasn't come up at all, but my biggest concern is how he has disrespected and tried to dilute confidence in our core electoral process as a country. I really hate that he's trying to block people from voting, and only the people that would not vote for him, he's trying to find ways to to exclude them from being able to vote. The way he's filing all these last minute, appeals to courts to try and keep people that he doesn't want voting from voting. That really bothers me. But it also bothers me that he messed with the post office leadership explicitly because he wanted to disrupt the mail system, because he knew that mail favored Democrats on average, and criticizing mail-in ballots and saying that that a couple hundreds or dozens or a couple ballots were found somewhere in some trash can, and that means that we can't trust the voting system. And then, the fact that he's basically declared already that if he loses, that it will be a scam. That's so that it will have been rigged. That's so awful. I've never heard of a president saying that if I win, it'll be great. If I lose, it was rigged. What world are we living in where a human can speak that way? A leader of the, of a country like the United States. And then the fact that he's even expressed uncertainty as to whether he's willing to step down, and that he's been coy and unwilling to sort of express his willingness to step down if he loses. And we just all know that if Biden happens to prevail, that there's going to be a huge, long, drawn-out battle where every possible means is used to try and undermine credibility of his successor if it's to be Biden. All of that is just super, super disturbing to me, because if you're going to undermine confidence in the electoral system, then what do we have? And he's already been too close to Putin. And we know that Putin undermined the electoral process of his own country, changed the Constitution, and then extended his own terms beyond what was legal by Russian standards. And Trump has already tweeted jokes about, 3 terms and 4 terms and 5 terms, violating even what the precedent that George Washington himself set for us, which is that he stepped down voluntarily after 2 terms. And of course, FDR made it so the Constitution had to be amended to do a 2-term limit. But certainly trying to just not even willing to respect the precedent of people like George Washington. That's, along with a lot of the things you guys expressed, that's my biggest concern about Trump. And I'm really upset with him for doing that. And so I'm sorry. Forgive me, listeners, for needing to share my own viewpoint, but I am just deeply concerned about that. Okay. So the way that I wanted to kind of bring it home is to have everybody share their prediction for the election, and any final closing words. And I'll try and go in a somewhat of a reverse order. So Quentin, we kind of had you go close to last. Quentin, what is your prediction on the election, and any final words from Quentin? You've been such a great panelist.
I don't know. I am loath to predict things because I made predictions 4 years ago and they were wrong. I am one of these people who obsessively reads like 538 and these kind of polling sites. The polls are showing, a very clear lead for Biden and a probable victory, but there are pollsters talking about the phenomenon of the shy Trump voter, someone who will not be willing to admit to a pollster that they're a Trump supporter. Apparently a phenomenon which is not mirrored in the other direction. So that makes me nervous. So I'm inclined to predict very conservatively and say Biden wins narrowly. But I would be delighted to be wrong and see a big victory, and most importantly, a Biden victory in Texas, which is now becoming competitive. But I'm not banking on it.
All right. Any final words, Quentin?
Nope. It was fun talking about all this. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you, Quentin. You've been great. Ryan, let's have you go next. Ryan, what's your prediction and any final words?
Well, my prediction is that Biden wins in a landslide. That comes from the site that Quentin predicted or mentioned, 538. I'm a stats guy. I'm a numbers guy. I look at those updated numbers 10 times a day. It's showing that Biden has a 90% chance of winning. I get that, it could be wrong. They were wrong last time. They've actually talked about how they were wrong on certain things and have tried to account for that. So anyway, that's my prediction that Biden will win in a landslide. It may take a while because of the mail-in votes. I hope that it's a landslide so that it's not close and we have court battles going on for months or longer. So, and then final thoughts. I want to express gratitude to you, John, for putting this all together. I personally learned a ton from the panel this morning that support Trump. I think it was a very good point that I think you and others made that, 40 to 45% of the people who are voting are supporting Trump. And, I live in a very conservative city, in a very conservative state, a part of a very conservative family. Most of the people that I interact with on a daily basis are very conservative Trump supporters, and they're good, awesome, loving people. And, I have been, especially since I left the church, I've been fighting for people to not look at me, not look down upon me because I'm not a Mormon anymore, or because, I'm a Democrat. And so I've tried to, have that same respect for others. And I think as we do that, we will regain the civility that I think is part of our country. And as we do that, I think we'll all live in a country that we'll be proud of.
I love it. A call for civility and respect. Thank you, Ryan. Gerardo, what's your prediction? And any closing thoughts? Make sure to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I don't know, John. I really didn't think Trump was going to win in 2016, and then he did. I think Joe Biden is going to win the popular vote. And as far as who wins the presidency, I really don't know. I hope it's Biden, but I really don't. I really don't know. Some days I think it's going to be Trump. Some days I think it's going to be Biden. So,
any final words or thoughts?
Just to thank you, John, for having us and having this discussion. I agree that the earlier discussion with Trump supporter was pretty enlightening and pretty helpful for me as far to understand more of Trump supporters' point of view. And yeah, thank you for allowing us to share our thoughts and our experiences and our reasons why we are Biden supporters.
So great to have you. All right, Donna number one, Donna Cox, or Donna A and Donna 1. Donna Cox.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm hoping that by what I saw in the lines when I voted yesterday.
Okay, wait, Donna, you're somehow you've joined us twice, and I don't know how you did that. So let me see if I can kick one of you from the studio. Okay, go ahead, Donna.
Am I there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but okay. Well, so you can hear me now?
Yep, everything's good.
Okay. So based on the lines that I saw yesterday when I voted, I'm hopeful because I saw a lot of women. I saw a lot of minorities. I saw a lot of really young people and I asked several of them if it was the first time they voted, and they said yes. So I'm hoping that means we have a crushing blue wave coming. I need some sanity back. I've lost both of my parents within 3 weeks of each other. It's been a really hard time, and I just need sanity.
Okay. Well, we wish that for you, Donna.
Thank you.
And you've been a delightful guest, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's go to Donna Kelly. What other part of the Donnas? Donna.
So I am really hoping for a landslide as well. I know that a lot of people perceive the Biden supporters as being just anti-Trump and will vote for anyone but Trump. But I'm actually a big pro-Biden voter because I believe that we need a return to civility and decency and inclusiveness and just competence. We need competence back in the White House. And so I am actually a very pro-Biden voter because I believe Biden has all those qualities. He's a decent, kind, thoughtful, experienced person and somebody that can bring our country out of this disastrous state that it's in right now. So I'm with a lot of the others. I'm hoping for a landslide because I hope that things like hate are denounced and racism is denounced and all of those ugly things that are going on in this country will be denounced by a landslide.
Love it, Donna.
Thank you,
so
John.
much. Roseanne, looks like you're next.
So I don't know, maybe it's kind of an old-fashioned attitude, but I think people in public life, whether it's teachers like me or political people, I think their behavior needs to be held to a higher standard. I think we need role models, and Donald Trump has just turned that all upside down. And one thing Joe Biden wasn't my initial first pick, but actually I think he's in a really good place because he is a gentleman. He is kind. He seems like he really hears people. And so I really hope that we have that. So we have, like Donna was saying, a return to civility in this country. And I just have a hard time making any predictions, but I hope that the Democrats have such a landslide that it can't go to the courts, or Donald Trump can't say, well, you didn't really win because of this. I mean, I hope it's a big, big landslide. I don't know what's going to happen.
Okay. Any final thoughts?
No, I really appreciate being here with all of you, and thank you for having me on today.
Okay. All right, Kim, I think you're the final person to make a prediction and to leave your closing thoughts. So we need you to bring us home, Kim.
I'm going to choose to be optimistic, and I'm going to say that Biden wins. And something that I heard Kamala say when I was researching everything is that she said, I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. And my prediction is that if we all just try to empathize with one another and try to be kind and try to understand where the other person is coming from and view them as a human that is just like us, that is trying to preserve their ideal of their country just like we are. When we realize that we're really all just the same, I think that can really help our country no matter who the president is. I may not have hope that President Trump will ever be a decent human being, but I can always have hope that everybody else is going to choose to be kind and choose to be decent and choose to love one another and to put everything aside when somebody needs something in need. We've seen that during this pandemic. We've seen that in every crisis that our country has faced. And yeah, the future looks scary with everything going on, but when I remember who Americans are, I feel a little bit better. And so thanks for having me on here.
I love it. All right. Well, I was really grateful for the panel in the morning, the Trump supporters who were courageous and willing to come on Mormon Stories, because it's a hard thing to do. And I'm also super grateful for all of you for being willing to come on the podcast to talk about your support for Biden, to speak up vocally. And you are all of you are such articulate, thoughtful, gracious human beings. And I've loved our time together today. So thank you, each of you, so much. You've been wonderful.
Thank you.
And
Seen that during this pandemic. We've seen that.
And I want to thank all the people who have joined us in the comments. I guess there's a lot of people I don't want to thank who have joined us in the comments because there have been some awful trolls in this episode, like 55,000 times worse than the previous episode. I don't know why that is, but shame on all you trolls. But for all the people who contributed positively to the conversation, thanks for everyone who joined us on YouTube and on Facebook in the comments. Appreciate that. And yeah, this has been great. So to close, I just want to say that I think this, as far as I'm concerned, I think this was a successful series. I was worried, I was nervous, but I think we got two panels who were willing to discuss the issues. I think it's really important that we learn to not demonize each other, to not dehumanize each other, and to try and have civil discourse where we can be thoughtful and even critical, but try and be compassionate and kind and honest and frank. And so I think we did it. I'm grateful for it. Thanks to everyone who has followed us. If you have any comments, when we post this to mormonstories.org, please make comments there. We appreciate your comments on YouTube and on Facebook. Feel free to keep making comments there. I want to thank everyone who donates to the Open Stories Foundation. Your donations make the Open Stories Foundation and Mormon Stories Podcast possible. So thank you. If, I always say that less than 1 out of every 1,000 listeners or viewers actually donates. So if you value Mormon Stories Podcast, if you value content like this, I invite you to go to mormonstories.org and to make a monthly contribution, to sign up for a monthly contribution. All these donations are tax deductible in the U.S. We are transparent, as all 501c3s should be. We are transparent in our finances. All of the money that you donate goes to the programming support, to support me, to support the work that I do. I love our board. We have a great board. And we are committed to making sure that your contributions advance the cause of the Open Stories Foundation and Mormon Stories, which is to provide communities of support and forums for people who are experiencing or have experienced the transition, to promote honesty within Mormonism, to discuss the hard things within a Mormon and a post-Mormon context, and to reduce pain within Mormonism and post-Mormonism, and to increase joy and healing and growth within Mormonism and post-Mormonism. So please support us if you can. Donate now if you can. And there are all sorts of these things you could do if you're not able to donate. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Facebook or on YouTube. You can share these episodes with family and friends. You can leave positive comments on iTunes, or positive reviews on iTunes or on Facebook. You can spread the word and let people know about these programmings, and share these episodes all over social media. So lots of things you can do. Please support us if you can. We have lots of great content coming up. So thanks for all the support. Thanks again to our wonderful panelists. And please stay tuned in the future for more cool content from Mormon Stories and the Open Stories Foundation. Thanks, everybody. My voice is shot. It's time to go. Take care, and we'll see you guys soon. And go vote. Freaking go vote. I don't care who you vote for. November 3rd in the United States, go vote, because this is a democracy, and we need your vote. So please go vote, and please spread the word about voting. All right, everyone. Love you guys. Take care. See you soon, and we'll talk to you again soon on Mormon Stories Podcast. Bye.